What's good, everyone? This is Supreme Harry, and boy do we have a treat for you. What if Fawkes bonded to Harry at age 1 and revealed the Phoenix throne was stolen from the Potters? Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Bonding Night. The curse hit James first. Harry wouldn't remember it, couldn't remember it, wouldn't be old enough to carry the memory in any form a grown mind could retrieve, but something older than memory recorded it anyway. The green light. The sound his father made, which wasn't a scream but something worse, a sudden extinguishing, like a candle snuffed between two fingers. Then the footsteps on the stairs, unhurried, because there was no one left to hurry for. Lily's voice, bargaining. Lily's voice, refusing. Then Lily's voice, gone. And then the curse hit the boy in the crib, and the world came apart at the seams. The shockwave rolled outward from Godric's hollow like a stone dropped in still water, ripple after ripple of displaced magic, ancient and violent and wrong, tearing through every enchanted thing within 50 miles. Wards fell. Protective charms unraveled like badly tied knots. Animals in the village woke and didn't settle again. An old woman 3 streets over would tell her grandchildren for the rest of her life that she'd heard something that night, not an explosion exactly, more like the sound of something enormous holding its breath and then letting go. In a village called Mold on the Wold, a phoenix lifted its head. Fawkes had been in the world for a very long time. Long enough to remember the founding of Hogwarts, long enough to remember what the Potter line had been before the world forgot what it was. He had been Dumbledore's familiar for 60 years, freely given, freely stayed, because Albus had been, for a long time, genuinely worth staying for. But the bond between a phoenix and a wizard was never the same as a phoenix blood bond, and Fawkes had always known the difference. One was friendship. One was fate. He felt the night crack open. He felt the child. The fire that blazed in his chest had nothing to do with Dumbledore's fireplace or the comfortable perch in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. It was older than that. It was the fire that lived at the base of everything, the first fire, the one that had burned before there were words for burning, and it pulled at him with a certainty so complete he was gone before he'd consciously decided to move. One moment perched. The next, a streak of gold and red across the Devon sky, burning so bright that a Muggle lorry driver on the A30 pulled over, hands shaking, and sat for 20 minutes trying to explain to himself what he'd seen. Fawkes reached Godric's hollow in the time it took the smoke to clear. The house was half standing. The upper floor had taken the worst of it, one wall entirely gone, the nursery open to the October air like a dollhouse with its front removed. Rubble and plaster and the scattered wreckage of an ordinary life. A child's mobile, miraculously intact, still turning slowly in the night wind above a crib that had been blasted sideways but not destroyed. And in the crib, a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's hair and a cut on his forehead that was already doing something no cut should do, glowing, faintly, with the residual magic of a curse that had failed for the first time in recorded history. Fawkes landed on the edge of the crib. He looked at the child for a long moment. The child looked back. Most infants, confronted with a large burning bird materializing out of the darkness, would have screamed themselves red. Harry Potter looked at Fawkes with his mother's green eyes, wide and steady, and made a small sound that was not fear. It was the sound of recognition. Fawkes bent his head and touched his beak, very gently, to the lightning bolt cut on Harry's forehead. One tear fell. The wound sealed itself, but that wasn't why Fawkes was crying, and it wasn't why the tear fell. The tear was for James and Lily, for the echo of them that clung to this room and to this child and to the cooling air around them both. The tear was for what had been lost tonight and could not be recovered. But then the bond fire answered. It rose from somewhere inside Harry Potter, some deep, preconscious, ancient part of him that had nothing to do with his 10 months of lived experience and everything to do with his bloodline, with who his family had been before the world forgot it, and it rose to meet Fawkes's own fire like 2 flames from the same source finally touching. The light in the ruined nursery turned gold. Harry reached up with one small fist and grabbed Fawkes's tail feathers with the grip of a child who has no idea that what he's holding is impossible. The bond settled into place like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a very long time. Fawkes sang. It was not a loud song. It was barely above a whisper, pitched for the child and the child alone, and it carried in it everything the phoenix had witnessed over centuries: rise and fall and rise again, loss and grief and the specific stubborn joy of surviving, the knowledge that fire burns things down and fire is also how things begin. It was a lullaby and a coronation and a truth all at once. Harry's eyes drooped. His grip on the tail feathers loosened. He slept. Fawkes settled himself on the edge of the crib and stayed there. When Hagrid arrived 40 minutes later, his lamp swinging wildly and his enormous face blotched red with grief and shock, he found a baby sleeping peacefully in a half-demolished nursery, a phoenix sitting watch over him, and no trace of whatever darkness had come here tonight except the scar and the silence and the absence of two people who had been, Hagrid thought with a shuddering sob, two of the best people he'd ever known. "Blimey," Hagrid said softly, looking at the phoenix. He had met Fawkes before, at Hogwarts. He knew who the bird belonged to. Fawkes looked at him with eyes like banked coals and made a sound that was not the full song but something simpler, a single note of warning. Hagrid looked at the baby. He looked at the bird. He was not, by anyone's measure, the fastest thinker in the wizarding world, but he was one of the most instinctively perceptive, and something in his vast chest told him he was looking at something that had changed tonight in ways no one had fully reckoned with yet. "Professor Dumbledore sent me," Hagrid said carefully. "I'm here to take the little one to his aunt and uncle." Fawkes didn't move. Hagrid reached for Harry very slowly. Fawkes watched him do it. When Hagrid lifted the boy from the crib, the phoenix stepped calmly from the crib's edge onto Hagrid's shoulder, settled his wings, and made it perfectly clear that he was coming along. Hagrid blinked. Then, because he had spent 30 years at Hogwarts and had learned to be accommodating about the unexpected, he said, "Right then," and carried them both out into the ruined night. Dumbledore arrived 12 minutes later to find the crib empty. He stood in the destroyed nursery for a very long time, reading the magical residue of what had happened here with the practiced attention of a man who had spent 80 years learning to read the world. He found the traces of the killing curse, its unique corruption still hanging in the air. He found Lily's sacrificial magic, immense and terrible and beautiful. He found the scar of Voldemort's destruction, gone, he was almost certain, or close enough to gone that it made no difference tonight. And he found the phoenix fire. He stood absolutely still, his hands behind his back, his magnificent beard stirring slightly in the wind coming through the broken wall. His expression didn't change. Only his eyes moved, tracing the arc of Fawkes's landing, the place where the bonfire had burned, the direction the bird had gone. He processed it the way he processed all unexpected information, quietly, privately, already thinking 3 steps ahead of the moment. Then he went downstairs to meet Minerva McGonagall, who had been watching the street all day as a cat, and he said the things that needed to be said, and he set in motion the arrangements that needed to be set in motion, and he did not mention the phoenix. He had a great deal to think about. 10 years passed. Number 4, Privet Drive was not a house that tolerated strangeness. Vernon Dursley had chosen it specifically for its normalcy, its pleasant suburban sameness, its neat lawn, its neighbors who minded their business and kept their hedges trimmed and didn't ask peculiar questions. Petunia maintained the house like a standard she was defending, and Dudley had absorbed his parents' values with the easy completeness of a child who has never been asked to question them. Harry had learned, early and efficiently, that the Dursleys' house had rules. Don't ask questions. Don't get better marks than Dudley. Don't let anyone see anything strange. Don't talk about the bird. He'd broken every one of them, regularly and without particular guilt, since he was about 4 years old. The Dursleys had tried, at first, to stop him. They'd tried raised voices and cupboard locking and removing meals. None of it had produced the fearful compliance they'd expected. Harry would sit through Vernon's red-faced shouting with a patience that unnerved the man more than defiance would have, and then carry on exactly as he'd been doing. It wasn't stubbornness exactly. It wasn't rebellion. It was more that Harry Potter had something in him that made the Dursleys' disapproval feel about as significant as weather, unpleasant, occasionally inconvenient, but not something worth reshaping yourself to avoid. Part of that was simply who he was. But part of it was Fawkes. Every night, when the house was quiet and the street was still, Fawkes came. He slipped through the open window of Harry's small bedroom with the silence of smoke and landed on the iron headboard of Harry's bed, and they sat together in the dark in a companionship that needed no words and used none. Sometimes Fawkes sang, quiet, liquid, beautiful, and Harry would lie on his back staring at the ceiling while the music moved through him like warm water. Sometimes the Phoenix showed him things. Not visions exactly. More like memories pressed through the bond like light through water, impressions of ancient things, of power moving through bloodlines like current through a river, of a seat of authority that had existed before any of the current governments of the magical world and would, if restored, supersede all of them. Harry didn't fully understand it. He was 10. He understood it the way children understand music before they understand its theory, in the body, in the bones, in the place behind the sternum where feeling lives before it becomes thought. What he understood clearly, his parents had been important. Not just clever or brave or well-loved, but important in a structural sense, the way a keystone is important to an arch. What he understood clearly, something had been taken. What he understood clearly, it was his. He'd asked Fawkes once, lying in the dark, whether they should do something about it now. He was 8 at the time. Fawkes had given him a look that Harry had learned to translate as eloquent amusement, tucked his beak under his wing, and gone to sleep. Right, Harry had thought. Later, then. He was a peculiar boy by Privet Drive standards. Quiet where his cousin was loud, precise where the neighborhood children were rough and careless, and possessed of a focused, measuring quality in his green eyes that adults found unsettling without being able to explain why. He was also, by any honest accounting, considerably cleverer than he let the school register suggest. He discovered around age 7 that getting better marks than Dudley triggered a predictable set of punishments, and he'd simply decided his actual abilities were not worth advertising to people who couldn't appreciate them. He had one friend in the neighborhood, a girl called Sarah who lived 3 streets over and was, at 10, already clearly going to become a scientist of some kind, given that she spent most of her time building things and taking other things apart to see how they worked. She didn't ask him about the bird because Harry had told her quite straightforwardly that the bird was real, that it was a phoenix, and that it visited him at night, and Sarah had given him the look of a person who finds this information interesting rather than alarming and asked several sensible questions about its size and dietary habits. Harry liked her enormously. She moved to Edinburgh that September, and he missed her with a clean, simple grief that he'd sat with for a few days and then packed away, because grief didn't help. By the time he was 10, Harry had the Dursleys managed. Not manipulated, he didn't have any particular interest in manipulating them, and they didn't have anything he wanted. But managed in the sense of understood. He knew where Vernon's tempers came from, he knew what Petunia was afraid of and why. He felt something close to pity for Dudley in his more charitable moments even when the boy was actively making his life difficult. He navigated their house the way a good sailor navigates shallow water, with steady attention and no particular resentment of the shallows. He cooked breakfast on the morning of his 11th birthday because it was what he did on most mornings, and because the smell of bacon and eggs was one of those ordinary sensory pleasures that he found genuinely worth having. He was standing at the stove in his oversized hand-me-down pajamas when the first letter came. It came with 7 others. They came through the letterbox, through the kitchen window, through the cat flap in the back door. They came addressed in green ink on yellowish parchment, addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, for Privet Drive, an address that felt, Harry thought, like someone being deliberately specific to make a point. Vernon Dursley came downstairs in his dressing gown and turned a shade of purple that was genuinely impressive. Harry turned off the burner, wiped his hands on a cloth, and picked up one of the letters from the kitchen floor. "Don't you dare open that," Vernon said. Harry looked at him. Then he opened it. He read it twice, carefully. It told him things he'd already known in their broad outlines, that he was a wizard, that there was a school, that he had a place waiting. What it didn't tell him, but what Fawkes's bond filled in with quiet certainty as he read, was that the school itself was only the beginning. That there were other letters that should have come. That there were other things waiting for him that had nothing to do with a first-year book list and an owl order form. "Give me that," Vernon said, his hand closing over the parchment. Harry let him take it. He already knew what it said. He was more interested in thinking about what it hadn't said. Vernon ripped the letter in half. Outside the kitchen window, high in the morning sky, a shape moved, a flash of red and gold, turning once in a slow circle before vanishing into the clouds. Harry watched it go. His face did something that the Dursleys might have described as a smile, if they'd had any imagination for what his face might actually be expressing, which they didn't. More letters came. Vernon burned them, hid them, finally boarded up the letterbox, and when letters began coming through every crack and crevice of the house, rolled under doors, dropped down the chimney, slipping through window frames with the insistence of water finding level, he packed the family into the car and drove them to a series of increasingly desperate bolt holes. Harry watched all of this with the calm of someone who knows there's no bolt hole that the magical world can't find when it's decided to find you. He didn't see any reason to say so. He let Vernon Dursley drive himself into a state of wild-eyed certainty that a rock in the middle of the sea was the answer, and when the enormous fist came through the door of the shack at midnight on Harry's 11th birthday, Harry was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Fawkes settled on his knee and a sense of anticipation that felt a great deal like the beginning of something. Rubeus Hagrid ducked through the door with a birthday cake and his old waterproof coat steaming with rain, and stopped when he saw the phoenix. Something shifted in his face. Recognition, and behind it, a great welling emotion that he wrestled down with an enormous sniff. "Still with you, then," he said, addressing Fawkes directly. "Thought you might be." Fawkes regarded him with calm gold eyes. Harry looked between them. "You've seen him before." "Sat with yeah," Hagrid said, "the night I found you. After everything that happened." He sat down heavily on the floor, the cake listed sideways, and he looked at Harry, really looked, the way the Dursleys never had, and his great face was full of feeling. "Yeah, look like your father," he said. "But you've got your mother's eyes." He paused. "Everyone always says that, I suppose. But it's true." "I know," Harry said. Not rudely. Simply. The way you'd say I know about something you'd held close for a long time. Hagrid explained magic. Harry listened, asked 3 precise questions: what happened to his parents' estates, where were the legal records of his guardianship, and what exactly was at Gringotts under his name, and Hagrid blinked at each one like a man realizing something was going on that he hadn't been briefed on. "Professor Dumbledore just told me to give ye the letter," Hagrid said, a little uncertain. "Said to take ye to Diagon Alley for your school things." "Dumbledore," Harry said. He tried the name in his mouth. Fawkes made a sound that was not quite the warning note he'd made to Hagrid on the night of the bonding, but was in the same family. "Headmaster of Hogwarts." "That's right. Does he know you're here?" "Sent me himself." Harry looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him. A warm, certain, knowing beat of communication passed between them through the bond, not words, never words, but meaning clear as clean water. "Yes. Be careful." "Not yet. But soon." "Right," Harry said, and stood up. "When do we go?" Diagon Alley on a Tuesday morning in late July was busy enough that Harry's entrance caused no particular stir, which was, he suspected, about to change very quickly. He walked beside Hagrid through the crowded street with Fawkes settled on his left shoulder, which drew stares, because phoenixes were not unknown in the wizarding world but were genuinely rare, and a phoenix walking openly with a child was the kind of thing you didn't see often enough to have a prepared reaction to. "Does he go everywhere with ye?" Hagrid asked, slightly strained. "Pretty much," Harry said. A woman in robes of deep purple stopped walking entirely to stare at them. A man in an apothecary doorway dropped what he was carrying. Two children pointed and were immediately shushed by their parents, who then stared anyway. Harry paid attention to none of it. He had his list, his vault key, which Hagrid had handed over with the gravity of someone presenting the crown jewels, and a very clear sense of what he needed to do first. Gringotts was cool and white-pillared and smelled of stone and old money, which was the smell of all serious institutions if you stripped them down. The goblin at the high front desk looked at Harry, looked at Fawkes, and the quality of its attention changed in a way that was subtle and complete and not subtle at all, the way a compass needle shifts when north is suddenly nearby. "Mr. Potter," it said. "Hello," Harry said. "I'd like to access my vault, please. Also, I have some questions about the estate." Hagrid had told him there was a vault. Hagrid had also told him, in vague terms, that the Potters had been a wealthy family. What Hagrid hadn't told him, what Harry suspected Hagrid genuinely didn't know, was the full picture. The goblin's name was Ripclaw, and he had been at Gringotts for 230 years, and in all that time he had never seen a phoenix bonfire up close. He was not a creature given to visible emotion. He took them to a private office, which was already a deviation from standard procedure significant enough that two other goblins found reasons to walk past the door, and he sat across from Harry with his sharp grey face doing something that might have been assessed, if you were being generous, as respect. "There is the matter of the primary vault," Ripclaw said, "which I believe is what your escort was instructed to show you. And then there is the matter of the sealed vaults. Which would you like to address first?" Hagrid made a sound. Harry looked at him briefly. "Sealed vaults," Harry said. "There are 3. The first was sealed by ministry order in 1926, co-signed by then-headmaster Armando Dippet and a junior ministry official named Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The second was sealed in 1943 under a contested inheritance filing. The third," Ripclaw paused, and in the pause lived something vast and old, "was never sealed through legal process at all. It was sealed through an act of bureaucratic misclassification that Gringotts flagged at the time and was overruled. The contents were designated as unclaimed artifact, no known heir. This designation has been awaiting dispute by a blood-recognized claimant ever since." The office was very quiet. Fawkes made no sound at all. "What's in the third vault?" Harry asked. "The Phoenix Throne," Ripclaw said, "and the regalia of the Potter sovereignty, which this bank was charged with protecting from the time of Linfred of Stinchcombe, who was your family's founding ancestor and the first Phoenix King of magical Britain. The sovereignty passed through 11 generations before it was," he chose his word with evident precision, "interrupted." Hagrid had gone the color of old chalk. "Now, hang on just a moment," he said. "That can't be right. The ministry would have, Professor Dumbledore would have, someone would have said, someone did say," Ripclaw said. He was looking at Harry. "We said it in 1943, when the misclassification was entered. We said it in 1965, when we filed a formal dispute. We said it in 1981, when Mr. and Mrs. Potter died and we filed an emergency blood claim on behalf of any surviving heir. Each filing was administratively rejected." He paused again. "We have been waiting for someone to come in person." Harry's hands were very still in his lap. Fawkes's tail feathers brushed his ear. "And the blood claim, how does it work?" "The Phoenix bond is itself the claim," Ripclaw said simply. "We can see it. There is no document in any ministry that supersedes a Phoenix blood bond. Not in British law, not in the International Confederation statutes. The Potter sovereignty was never legally revoked, Mr. Potter. It was stolen." The word landed in the room like a stone in deep water. Harry sat with it for a moment. He was 11 years old, small for his age, sitting in a goblin bank in a world he'd technically only known about for 12 hours, and a 200-year-old goblin had just told him that his birthright had been taken from his family through bureaucratic sleight of hand while a man named Dumbledore watched. He didn't feel rage. He was slightly surprised by this, he'd expected rage. What he felt was something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a shape that had always been there becoming suddenly visible. The feeling of something clicking into place. Right, he said. I want to open all 3 vaults. And I want copies of every filing your bank has made regarding the Potter sovereignty, going back to the first complaint. And I want a binding document from Gringotts acknowledging my status as heir and Phoenix bonded claimant. We have been preparing that document, Ripclaw said, since the moment you walked through the door. The sealed vaults were deep. Deeper than the standard vaults, deeper than the high-security ones, deep in a part of Gringotts that smelled of earth and time and the particular density of things that have been waited for. Harry walked the passages in the goblin cart with Hagrid sitting beside him, still the color of chalk, Fawkes standing on the cart's front edge like a figurehead, his fire casting long warm shadows on the stone walls. The first 2 vaults contained what Ripclaw had called the estate materials, legal documents, family correspondence, objects of power and history packed carefully in preservation enchantments. Harry would need weeks to go through them properly. He would go through every word. The 3rd vault door was not like the others. It was black iron, old enough that Harry couldn't guess its age, and it had a phoenix worked into the metal in a style that was clearly not decorative. The phoenix was mid-flight, wings spread, and its eye was a single ruby that seemed to be lit from within. Harry put his hand on the door, and the ruby flared gold, and the vault opened. He didn't say anything when he saw it. He just looked. The throne wasn't what he'd expected. He hadn't let himself expect anything specific, which was probably why the reality of it still hit him in the chest like a hand laid flat over the sternum. It was not ornate. It was not the jeweled excess of a fairy tale prop. It was dark wood, ancient, so dark it was nearly black, with lines worn into it by centuries of hands and a back carved in the same phoenix mid-flight as the door. It sat in the center of the vault on a low stone platform, and it radiated something that wasn't quite heat but wasn't quite not heat either. Something alive. Something that had been waiting. Fawkes flew from Harry's shoulder and landed on the throne's back, settled his wings, and looked at Harry. Harry walked across the vault. He put his hand on the armrest of the throne. The warmth of it ran up through his palm and into his arm and settled in the center of his chest next to the bonfire, and for a single clear second Harry saw, through the bond, through Fawkes, through everything that had passed between them in 10 years of nighttime visits and quiet music, what his family had been. Not perfectly. Not in detail. In feeling. In the broad strokes of a legacy that stretched back further than he had words for. He didn't sit in it. Not here, not today, not in a bank vault. He had the instinct, Fawkes's instinct, he thought, the bird sense of ritual and rightness, that the first time he sat in the Phoenix throne should matter. Should be earned and witnessed and chosen, not stumbled into in a basement. But he kept his hand on the armrest for a long moment. I'll be back for this, he said, quietly, to the vault and the throne and the empty air that was somehow full of his parents' absence. Then he turned around and walked out, and his face, when Hagrid looked at it, was not the face of a grieving child or an overwhelmed one. It was the face of someone who has just confirmed a direction of travel that they've known about for a very long time. Harry, Hagrid said, his voice rough. Listen, I had no idea. I want you to know that. I had no idea about any of this. I know, Harry said. He meant it. He climbed back into the cart and looked straight ahead. Does Dumbledore know I went to Gringotts today? I imagine he will, when I make my report. Good, Harry said simply. The cart moved. Fawkes sang, soft and low, in the dark. On the Hogwarts Express platform at King's Cross, which Harry had no reason to be on yet, that was September, still more than a month away, Albus Dumbledore sat in his office at Hogwarts and received a message from Gringotts that came in the bank's formal sealed envelope. He read it twice, very carefully. He set it down. He stood at his window and looked out over the grounds for a long time. On the desk behind him, where Fawkes's perch stood, there was nothing. It had been empty since October 31st, 1981. Nearly 10 years. Dumbledore looked at the empty perch. He had told himself, for 10 years, that Fawkes's departure was grief, that the bird was mourning the Potters and would return when the mourning passed. He had told himself this because the alternative was a reckoning he had not been ready to have. He looked at the Gringotts letter again. Then he closed his eyes. "I see," he said to the empty room, very quietly. Down at Diagon Alley, Harry Potter was buying school robes and looking at wands, and the magical world had absolutely no idea that the ground had shifted underneath it. They were in Ollivanders when Fawkes did the thing he had only done once before in Harry's memory. He sang a single, clear, piercing note, not the full song, not the lullaby, but the note that lived at the very center of the song, the one that rang off stone and wood and the air itself, the one that was a frequency more than a sound. Every wand in the shop responded. Not vibrated. Not twitched. Responded, a slight, unanimous turning, the way plants turn toward sun, a barely perceptible collective orientation toward Harry that lasted only a second before it passed. Ollivander himself came out from the back with his pale eyes wide and stood in his shop for a moment simply staring. "I wondered," he said, "if you might come in today." Harry looked at him with the measuring attention that had been unnerving adults since he was 3. "You know about the bond." "I know what a phoenix song in this shop means," Ollivander said carefully. "It means that every wand core in here wants to meet you." He paused. "That has not happened before. Not in 400 years of this shop's operation." He looked at Fawkes. "Not since the first Phoenix King." "I'll need a wand," Harry said. "Yes," Ollivander agreed. "You will. Though I rather think the wand you need isn't on any of these shelves." He turned back to his stacks and began moving through them with purpose. "The phoenix whose feathers gave us your father's wand, and, in a particular coincidence that I suspect you'll come to understand, the wand of a certain other wizard as well, that phoenix gave 2 feathers. 2 wands." He came back carrying a box. "Your father's wand is gone. But the holly and phoenix feather, here." He held out the box. "The core is from Fawkes. Your Fawkes, Mr. Potter. He gave a feather, the night of your bonding. I was informed of it. I have been holding it." The wand was 11 inches, holly, with a core that Harry could feel already, warm and alive and unmistakably the same fire that burned in his chest through the bond. He took it and the warmth bloomed up his arm and Fawkes made a sound of deep, ringing satisfaction. "There we are," Ollivander said softly. He had the look of a man who has lived long enough to see a thing he thought was myth. "That will do very nicely." Harry set 3 galleons on the counter. Ollivander waved them off. "A Phoenix King's wand," he said simply, "is made at cost." Harry picked up the galleons and put them back on the counter anyway. "I'm not a king yet," he said. "When I am, I'll know better than to take what I haven't earned." He picked up his wand. "Thank you, Mr. Ollivander." He walked out into the afternoon sunshine of Diagon Alley with Fawkes on his shoulder and his wand in his pocket. In 5 weeks until Hogwarts, and the world was already a different shape than it had been this morning. Hagrid caught up with him outside, slightly out of breath, carrying Harry's newly purchased school supplies in arms that could have comfortably carried a small car. He looked at Harry with the complicated expression of a man who has just spent a day watching a child he's known as a baby become something he can't quite categorize. "You all right?" Hagrid asked. "Yes," Harry said. He thought about it. "Actually, yes. I think I am." He looked up at the sky. It was blue and enormous and full of the particular quality of late July, end of summer heat, the smell of Diagon Alley's unique mixture of potion ingredients and parchment and hot cobblestones, somewhere above him the distant call of an owl. The magical world, going about its business, not yet knowing what had moved today. He thought about Dumbledore reading that Gringotts letter. He thought about a vault door with a ruby eye. He thought about his mother's bargaining voice and the fact that she'd chosen to stay, chosen it, against all sense, against every survival instinct, because of him. There was a debt in that. Not of grief, which would paralyze, but of something stronger. Obligation. The obligation of someone who was given a chance not to waste it. He would go to Hogwarts. He would learn everything they could teach him and several things they couldn't. He would read every document in those sealed vaults. He would understand every piece of what had been taken and how, and by whom, and what it would take to restore it. And at some point, Albus Dumbledore was going to have to sit across from him and answer some very direct questions. But that was later. That was for the shape of things to come, which Fawkes had been showing him in flashes and impressions for 10 years. Not yet. Tonight, he had a train ticket to sort out. And a letter to send to the Dursleys, which would be brief and quite final, informing them that he would be leaving for Hogwarts on September the 1st and had arranged, through the Potter Estates solicitors at Gringotts, for a modest monthly payment to continue into their account in recognition of the 10 years he had lived in their house. Not because he owed them gratitude, he'd assessed that question fairly and honestly and concluded he didn't, but because Harry Potter had no interest in being petty, and loose ends were untidy, and he had larger things to think about. Fawkes tightened his feet slightly on Harry's shoulder, the Phoenix equivalent, Harry had learned, of a hand squeezed briefly in passing. Harry reached up and touched the bird's feathers once, lightly. "I know," he said. The afternoon burned gold around them, and Harry Potter walked out of Diagon Alley carrying his stolen birthright in one pocket and his wand in the other, and he was, by any fair measure, the most dangerous 11-year-old in Britain. He was going to enjoy that. Chapter 2, The Castle remembers the Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry Potter was on it 20 minutes early. He'd said goodbye to the Dursleys the way you say goodbye to a dentist, civil, final, without particular feeling. Vernon had looked relieved. Petunia had looked at the wall somewhere to Harry's left, which was what she always did when she was feeling something she didn't want to name. Dudley had been eating cereal and hadn't looked up. Harry had carried his trunk down the stairs himself, called a taxi from the telephone in the hallway, and left number 4 Privet Drive without looking back. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos in the best possible way, families and owls and mountains of luggage, steam from the scarlet engine rolling thick over everything, the particular pitched excitement of children at the edge of something new. Harry moved through it with his trunk on a trolley and Fawkes on his shoulder, which earned him a wide bubble of startled space wherever he walked. People didn't stare in the rude, obvious way Muggles sometimes did. They stared sideways, with the uncertain quality of people trying to work out whether what they were seeing was what they thought they were seeing. A large red-headed family nearly collided with his trolley at the platform entrance. There were 6 children that Harry could count, various ages, and a mother who had the look of someone who had been managing catastrophes so long it had become her natural state. "Sorry, dear," the mother said, riding one of her sons. "Arthur, watch the Ronnie, don't, that's a phoenix," said the youngest boy, who was about Harry's age, with a spectacular collection of freckles and wide blue eyes currently fixed on Fawkes with the expression of someone whose brain had temporarily left the premises. "Yes," Harry said. "Why have you got a phoenix?" "He bonded to me when I was a baby." The boy opened and closed his mouth. "Is that," he leaned closer, squinting. "Are you, Harry Potter?" Harry said. The entire family stopped. All of them, simultaneously, the way a flock of birds changes direction, mid-motion 1 second, completely still the next. The mother's expression did something complicated and warm, and one of the older boys swore quietly and was immediately elbowed by another. "We knew your parents," the mother said. She had kind eyes, red-rimmed at the corners, and the slightly waterlogged quality of someone who cried easily and didn't apologize for it. "Arthur worked with your father, briefly. I'm Molly Weasley. This lot are mine, for my sins." She looked at Fawkes with an expression that Harry had started to recognize, that mixture of recognition and reverence. "Is that, Fawkes?" Harry said. "Yes." "Oh," she said, softly, like a door opening. The youngest Weasley son, Ron, he gathered, had recovered enough to look at Harry with something between hero worship and the specific kind of competitive appraisal that Harry recognized as the opening move of a potential friendship. "Do you want to sit together on the train?" he asked. I've been on it before, obviously, but only to see Fred and George off, so I know where the good compartments are. Harry looked at him. 11 years old, clearly the youngest boy, clearly accustomed to being the most junior person in every room he occupied, and dealing with it by being the loudest. Harry liked him immediately. Sure, Harry said. They found a compartment near the back. Ron's older brothers, Fred and George, who were twins and carried themselves with the energy of people perpetually mid-explosion, winked at Harry as they passed in the corridor. A third older brother, Percy, offered a stiff handshake and what sounded like a prepared speech about the honor of sharing a train with the boy who lived, which Harry received with good grace and zero interest. Fawkes had relocated from Harry's shoulder to the luggage rack above, which he occupied like a very regal ornament, and was now watching the two boys below with the attentive calm of a parent at a school play. So, Ron said, when the train had pulled out of the station and the London skyline was unreeling past the window. Did you grow up knowing about being a wizard? Not officially. I knew things were different. Harry looked out the window. Fawkes used to show me things. Impressions. I knew there was a world, even when nobody told me. Ron thought about this. That sounds mental, he said, in a tone that clearly meant it sounded brilliant. It was a bit strange, Harry agreed. My mum cried when she found out you were on the platform, Ron said conversationally. She thinks everyone in our family thinks Dumbledore hung the moon, so she was going on about your bond and the throne on the way here, and then she started crying. She does that. Harry looked at him carefully. She knows about the throne. Mum knows everything about everyone. She's like a library that also cooks. Ron unwrapped a sandwich from wax paper. Fred said it was on a notice in the Daily Prophet this morning. Potter heir makes Gringotts claim on ancestral sovereignty. 3 inches on page 4, next to an advert for a new brand of cauldron. He shrugged. Fred said if it had been anyone else it'd have been front page. 4 inches on page 4, Harry thought. So the story was out. Dumbledore would have read it already. The Ministry would have read it. Whoever had benefited from the Phoenix throne sitting misclassified in a bank vault would have read it. He filed it away and focused on Ron, who was now offering half his sandwich. Harry took it. It was corned beef, and genuinely excellent, and he said so. Mum made them, Ron said, pleased. She could make cardboard taste like a roast. The compartment door slid open and a girl came in with the decisive energy of someone who does not drift through doorways but passes through them purposefully. She was brown-skinned, brown-eyed, and carrying a very large book with the unself-conscious ease of someone who reads in all contexts and sees no reason to hide it. Sorry, she said, not sounding particularly sorry. All the other compartments are either full or have something hexing something else in them. I'm Hermione Granger. Harry Potter, Harry said. And Ron Weasley. Sit down. She sat. Noticed Fawkes. Went entirely still for approximately 2 seconds, processing, Harry recognized, rather than reacting. Then she opened her book and looked up at him with an expression that was the most refreshing thing he'd encountered all day. She was not particularly odd. I know who you are, she said. I've read about the Phoenix Bond. Magical Sovereignty and the Phoenix Compact by Caradoc Beery. It's out of print. My parents are dentists so they didn't know about it, but I found it in a second-hand shop in Hogsmeade when we went to Diagon Alley for my wand. It's extraordinarily interesting, actually. She paused. The book says the Phoenix throne is supposed to carry a veto power over all Wisengamot legislation. That means if your claim is valid, and the Phoenix Bond would seem to indicate it is, you could theoretically nullify almost any law passed in the last several decades. There was a beat of silence. Hermione, Ron said, we've been sitting here for 4 minutes. I'm aware, she said, and went back to her book. Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he said, the book is right. Tell me what else it says. The conversation lasted the rest of the journey. The boats across the lake were Harry's first real look at the castle, and it hit him differently than he'd expected. He'd grown up with Fawkes's impressions, echoes of Hogwarts, centuries of accumulated memory from a phoenix who had lived there, so he'd thought he'd be prepared. He wasn't. The castle rose out of the darkness and the autumn mist with the particular authority of something that has stood in one place long enough to become the landscape itself, lights burning in 100 windows, towers cutting into the stars, and the lake around them black and still and enormous. Every child in the boats was silent. Some of them for the first time since Harry had met them. But for Harry, the silence had a different quality. Because as the boats moved across the water and the castle grew larger and the distance narrowed, something in his chest was doing something new. The bonfire, constant, familiar, warm since he was 11 months old, was answering. Not to Fawkes, who was floating alongside the boats in a way that was causing significant consternation among the older students watching from the bank. Not to anything external. Hogwarts itself was responding. Not with magic he could see. With something underneath magic, structural, deep in the stone, old as the foundations. The castle was built on phoenix fire enchantments. Fawkes had shown him that, years ago, a flicker of impression without full meaning. Helga Hufflepuff had woven them in at the founding. Salazar Slytherin had argued against them. Godric Gryffindor had insisted. Rowena Ravenclaw had made them precise. Phoenix fire at the base of every protective ward on the castle, drawing the building's magic from the same source that now lived in Harry's chest. He felt the castle recognize him. It was not flashy. It did not announce itself. The torches in the entrance hall burned slightly brighter for a moment as he walked through the doors, and then settled back, and nobody seemed to notice except a suit of armor that turned its helmet fractionally to watch him pass, and the stone staircase, whose railing seemed to warm briefly under his hand. Hermione, walking beside him, noticed his expression. "What is it?" "Nothing," he said. Then, because she'd spent 4 hours on a train being genuinely useful and deserved better than that, the castle. "It knows who I am." She processed this with the efficiency he was already coming to expect from her. "The phoenix fire enchantments in the foundations," she said. "Yes, that would track. Hogwarts, a history is vague about it, but it implies there are dormant enchantments that respond to the founding family's bloodlines." A pause. "Are you in any of the founding family's bloodlines?" "Not exactly. But the Phoenix throne predates Hogwarts." "Same fire." She nodded once, filing it away. "You should probably not announce that to everyone immediately." "I wasn't planning to," Harry said mildly. "You also shouldn't let Dumbledore know the castle is responding to you until you're in a better legal position." Harry looked at her sideways. "What?" she said. "I told you, I read the book. The headmaster's authority at Hogwarts draws partly from those same enchantments. If the castle defers to you instead of him, that's a significant thing to figure out on the first night." "Yes," she agreed. "But it's better to know." He thought he was going to like Hermione Granger enormously, in the specific way that you like people who refuse to be impressed by the wrong things. The Great Hall was everything Fawkes's impressions had suggested and several things they hadn't, the ceiling open to the night sky, hundreds of candles floating in the air, for long tables full of students, all of them looking at the cluster of first years with the territorial interest of people who have already settled in. Harry walked in and a ripple went through the room. He was used to stairs. He gave them no particular reaction. Fawkes had come to rest in the rafters, 60 feet up, a warm gold presence in the candlelight. Professor McGonagall, sharp-eyed, square-jawed, wearing robes the green of deep water, was explaining the Sorting Hat. Harry listened with half his attention. The other half was noting the faculty table. He found Dumbledore immediately, tall, white-haired, magnificent in dark blue robes, presiding over the hall with the easy authority of a man who has occupied a room's attention for so long it has become natural to him. Dumbledore was already looking at Harry. Not obviously. Not with the pointed stare of someone making a point. With the careful, peripheral, deeply attentive quality of a man who is watching something very closely while appearing to watch everything equally. Harry had grown up doing something similar and recognized it for exactly what it was. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Briefly, directly, without challenge but without deference either. Just, I see you looking. I don't mind. We'll talk soon. Then he looked back at the hat. The sorting went alphabetically, which meant he was waiting for a while. He used the time to read the room, for tables, for sets of energy, the Slytherins furthest away watching him with expressions ranging from hostile curiosity to carefully concealed interest. One blond boy at the Slytherin table was staring at Harry with the focused intensity of someone who had been briefed. Harry filed him as significant. He had the jaw structure and the particular brand of deliberate elegance that meant old money and the kind of upbringing that teaches you to assess threats in formal settings. Draco Malfoy, he'd guess. He'd read through enough of his family's correspondence in the Gringotts vaults to know that name. Potter, Harry. Every person in the Great Hall who wasn't already looking at him was now. Harry walked to the stool, sat down, and placed the hat on his head with the same matter-of-fact composure he'd have used for anything else. The hat's voice was immediate and oddly intimate, directly inside his skull. Oh. Hello. You're not quite what I expected. What did you expect? Harry thought back. The last few hundred first years I've sorted have mostly been fairly uncomplicated. You, on the other hand, the hat seemed to be taking a long inventory. Phoenix Bond. Phoenix Sovereignty. 3 sealed vaults, now opened. A meeting with Dumbledore that hasn't happened yet but is clearly inevitable. Exceptional natural magic. And a quality I can only call, a pause, intentionality. You know what you're here to do. Roughly, Harry agreed. The throne complicates things, you know. There are people in this very room who would prefer you didn't pursue it. And there are houses here that would serve your purposes better than others. Which house would serve my purposes best? Slytherin would give you political connections and the pleasure of watching Lucius Malfoy slowly realize he cannot outmaneuver his own king. Ravenclaw would give you the knowledge you need. Hufflepuff would give you loyalty that doesn't bend a beat. But Gryffindor was my father's house, Harry said. And my mother's. Yes. And there is one more reason. The hat paused. Godric Gryffindor was the Phoenix King's closest friend. Gryffindor Tower was built to his specification, with a Phoenix chamber at the top that has been locked and empty for 300 years. You are the only living person for whom it will open. Harry sat with that for a moment. Also, the hat added, your friends are going to Gryffindor. Which friends? The ones you made on the train. The castle told me. It's been a long time since it was this excited about anything. Gryffindor, Harry said, out loud. The hat was shouted before he finished the word. The Gryffindor table erupted. The noise rolled through the hall like a wave. Harry set the hat on the stool and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and high in the rafters Fawkes spread his wings and sang one brilliant, soaring note that echoed off the stones and died slowly, and the entire hall was silent for 3 full seconds after it finished. Dumbledore, at the faculty table, set down his goblet very carefully. The next morning, Harry went looking for the Phoenix chamber before breakfast. He'd woken at 6, left Ron sleeping in a tangle of red-flecked hair and at least 4 blankets, and climbed up through Gryffindor Tower alone, Fawkes rising from the foot of his bed and following silently. The castle was quiet at this hour, the specific quiet of old buildings in early morning, full of settling stone and distant drafts. His footsteps on the stairs had the confidence of someone who knows where they're going even in unfamiliar territory. The Phoenix chamber was at the very top of the tower, behind a plain wooden door that looked like a cleaning cupboard. It had no handle. Harry stood in front of it and put his palm flat against the wood, and the bonfire answered the gesture like a call and response, and the door opened. Inside was a circular room. Not large, 20 feet across, maybe. Stone walls, stone floor, a single round window looking east where the sun was just beginning to pull itself over the mountains. No furniture. In the exact center of the floor, inlaid in gold and ruby, was a phoenix in full flight. The mosaic was old enough that the gold had worn to the color of warm honey, but the ruby eye was perfect, untouched by the centuries, the same deep-lit red as the eye on the vault door in Gringotts. Fawkes landed in the center of the mosaic and sang. This was the full song. Not the nighttime lullaby, not the single warning note. The full song, with all of it, the grief that gave way to joy, the ending that was also a beginning, the fire that destroys and the fire that restores, and it rang in the stone room and the stone room answered. The mosaic glowed. The wall's carvings, which Harry hadn't noticed until the light picked them out, resolved from shadow into image, the history of the Phoenix throne, rendered in stone around the room's circumference. He walked it slowly. Linfred of Stinchcombe, first Phoenix king, barely a wizard by modern standards but the one who had first made the compact with the Phoenixes. His descendants, one after another. The court. The Wizengamot, which the throne had once led directly. And then, he stopped. The last images. 3 generations back. His great-great-grandfather, Charles Potter the Elder, Phoenix King. A ministry document, rendered in stone with meticulous detail. Signatures. And then, a gap. A visual absence, the carvings ending mid-narrative, as if whoever had made them had stopped with the theft rather than carve what came after. Harry stood at the gap for a long time. I'm going to finish this, he said, to the room, to the carvings, to the particular quality of absence that lived at that gap in the stone. Then, because he was practical, not before breakfast, though. Fawkes made the sound Harry had come to understand as a laugh. Defense against the dark arts was taught by a man named Quirrell who wore a purple turban and taught with the nervous energy of someone expecting to be ambushed. He flinched at sudden noises, lost his thread mid-sentence, and had the general demeanor of a man deeply unhappy about something he couldn't discuss. Harry sat in the front row and watched him with the measuring attentiveness that he applied to everything. There was something wrong with Quirrell. Not his teaching, which was mediocre but not wrong, but something underneath. Something in the way the magic around him sat uneasy. Something in the smell, which was not quite the garlic Hermione had hypothesized, but something older and more specific that Harry associated, through the bond, with Fawkes's oldest and clearest warnings. He didn't say anything in class. He sat and watched and took notes and answered 3 questions with the efficiency of someone who has read the material and then some. After class, he fell into step with Hermione in the corridor. Ron was on his other side, complaining about the turban. He flinched, Ron said, when that window banged. He actually jumped out of his chair. He's afraid of something, Hermione said. Or someone, Harry said. They both looked at him. The ward on the 3rd floor, Harry said. He'd noticed it the day before, felt it, really, through the same structural sense that had felt the castle's recognition. A charm on a door, strong and recent, layered over something that the castle itself seemed uncertain about. Whatever Dumbledore is protecting up there, Quirrell knows about it. And he's being watched. The turban, Harry paused, trying to pin down the association from the bond. Fawkes's oldest warnings. The residue of dark magic, specific and ancient. I think something is living under the turban. Ron stopped walking. Sorry, what? I'm probably wrong, Harry said, though he said it in the tone of someone who didn't think they were probably wrong. I'll look into it. You'll look into it, Ron repeated. After I deal with the correspondence from the Wizengamot, Harry said. I received 2 letters this morning. The junior undersecretary wants a meeting. There's also a letter from the minister's office asking me to clarify the scope of my Gringotts claim. Another silence. You've been at school for 18 hours, Ron said. The story ran in the Prophet, Harry said. I knew they'd respond quickly. Hermione, he looked at her. The book you mentioned. The Caradoc Beery one. Did it detail the legal mechanism for reclaiming a contested sovereignty? Specifically the steps after Gringotts' recognition? It did, she said. She had her bag open and was already pulling out a notepad. You need 3 things, the Phoenix Bond, which you have. A Gringotts recognition document, which you have. And a public acknowledgement before the Wisengamot by no fewer than 5 sitting members. That's the hardest part. Why? Because the people who benefit from the current system are the people currently sitting on the Wisengamot. She looked at him over her notepad. You need allies in there. People who would stand up and formally acknowledge your claim. That means political work, not just legal work. Harry nodded slowly. Okay. Who are the current Wisengamot members most likely to be sympathetic? The Longbottoms have a seat, Hermione said. Though it's been held by the family's proxy for a decade since, she hesitated, since what happened to Neville's parents. Harry turned to look for Neville Longbottom in the corridor behind them. He'd been walking with them, he realized, a quiet, solid presence he'd been aware of without fully clocking. Neville was square-faced, a little round-cheeked, still in the way of someone who hadn't quite grown into themselves, and was looking at the floor with the expression of someone who has heard their family's tragedy referenced in passing and developed a method for carrying it. Neville, Harry said. Neville looked up. I'm sorry about your parents, Harry said, directly, without the hedging softness that people usually applied to that topic. And I'd like to talk to you about your family's Wisengamot seat, when you're ready. Neville stared at him. Not with offense, with the specific expression of someone who has expected either pity or erasure and received neither. Okay, he said slowly. Not today, Harry said. Next week. After I've written back to the ministry. Neville nodded, still looking slightly winded. Ron nudged Harry as they turned the corridor. You know, most people spend their first week at Hogwarts worrying about which way to the Charms classroom. I know where the Charms classroom is, Harry said. Obviously, Ron muttered. The letter to the Wisengamot's junior undersecretary was 3 paragraphs long, drafted in the handwriting of someone who had spent 10 years reading his parents' correspondence and absorbed their formal register like a second language. Harry reread it once, changed one word, and rolled it. Fawkes carried it out the tower window into the early evening. The letter to the minister's office was 2 paragraphs. The scope of his claim, Harry wrote, was exactly what Gringotts had documented, no more and no less. The Phoenix throne and its associated sovereignty were Potter ancestral property misclassified under fraudulent bureaucratic procedure. He had no wish for unnecessary disruption to existing ministry operations. He did have every intention of pursuing the claim to completion, and he would welcome the minister's cooperation. He sealed it and gave it to the school owl Hermione had commandeered. Then he sat back and looked at Fawkes, perched on the windowsill with the sunset firing his feathers to pure gold. Do you think Dumbledore will try to stop me? He asked. Fawkes turned his head. One gold eye, direct and unblinking. The bond answered not in yes or no but in image, and what it showed him was not conflict. What it showed him was something more like chess. A board with many pieces, most of them in motion, and a hand that had been moving them carefully for a very long time. He'll try to redirect me, Harry said, parsing the impression. He won't come at it directly. He'll try to make me see it differently. Make me think it's too dangerous, or too disruptive, or that the world isn't ready. He thought about it. He believes he's right. That's going to make him harder to deal with than someone who just wants power. Fawkes made a sound that was agreement and something else, something sad, as if the bird had known this about Dumbledore for a long time and had been waiting, with the patience of a creature who has lived through countless human lifespans, for the moment someone with the authority to address it finally arrived. You could have told him, Harry said. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious. All those years. You were his familiar. You could have told him to return what was taken. A long beat of silence. Then Fawkes sang 4 notes, low and specific, and what they meant, what they carried through the bond, was something that Harry turned over in his mind for the rest of the evening. I was never his. I stayed because I chose to. And I left when I found you. Dumbledore called Harry to his office on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks into term. Harry had been expecting it. He'd seen the headmaster looking at him at mealtimes, that careful, peripheral watching, and he'd been watching back with the same quality of attention, and they had been, in a sense, having a conversation about the shape of what was coming without exchanging a word. The office was extraordinary. Books floor to ceiling, instruments Harry couldn't name and wasn't sure anyone under 40 could name, the particular accumulation of a long and brilliant life. And the perch, Fawkes's old perch, bare and empty on one side of the desk. Harry looked at it as he sat down. He couldn't tell whether Dumbledore had kept it as a hope or a rebuke to himself. "Biscuit?" Dumbledore said. "No, thank you," Harry said. Dumbledore settled his hands on the desk and looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. "You've had a busy few weeks," he said, in the tone of a man who finds this interesting rather than alarming, though Harry doubted very much that was the whole truth. "It's been a good start," Harry agreed. "The Ministry has been in touch with me," Dumbledore said. "As I suspect you predicted they would be. The Wizengamot is unsettled." He paused. "There are people who will not welcome the re-establishment of the Phoenix throne, Harry. People with significant political power. I want you to understand the landscape you're moving through." "I appreciate that," Harry said. He held the old man's eyes steadily. "I'd also appreciate your account of how the throne came to be in the Gringotts vault under a false classification. Specifically the document Gringotts showed me, from 1926. With your co-signature." The office was very quiet. Dumbledore didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He had been through too many difficult conversations over too long a life to flinch at directness, and Harry gave him credit for that. But something moved behind his eyes, something with depth and weight and old pain in it. "I was 25 years old," Dumbledore said. "And I believed," he stopped. Started again. "I believed the world was safer without a concentrated point of sovereignty. The throne made the Potter line a target. The First Wizarding War had already claimed," another pause, "people I cared about. And your family's claim was contested at the time. There were those who argued, Gringotts didn't agree with the contest," Harry said. "They filed against the classification 4 times. "Yes. And you overruled them." "I was not acting alone," Dumbledore said. The Ministry used your name to legitimize the theft," Harry said, still pleasantly, still holding the old man's eyes. "Whether you knew that at the time or not, the outcome was the same." He paused. "I'm not asking you to apologize yet, Professor. I'm asking you to understand that I know the shape of it." A long silence. The instruments on the shelves ticked and turned. Somewhere in the castle, very distantly, a bell rang for the changing of a class. Dumbledore looked at him, truly looked, with the full weight of a mind that had, over 80 years, looked at and understood a great many extraordinary things, and something shifted in his expression. Something between respect and something more complicated. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said. "People keep saying that," Harry said. "What is it you're planning to do, Harry? Specifically?" "Take my seat on the Wizengamot," Harry said. "Recover the throne. Re-establish the sovereignty in a form appropriate to the current world." He looked at Dumbledore with the clear, specific attention of someone who has thought this through. "I have no interest in ruling by fiat. The throne's veto power is real, but I'm not planning to use it like a weapon. I want to use it like a correction. There are laws on the books that exist specifically because of the political vacuum left by the throne's absence, laws that favor certain families and punish others. I want to address those." Dumbledore was quiet. "I'm going to do this," Harry said. "The question I have for you is whether you're going to make it harder than it needs to be." The word "I" was doing a great deal of work in that sentence and they both knew it. Harry had just told the most powerful wizard in Britain, the man who had co-signed the theft of his birthright, the man who had spent the last decade arranging his life on a shelf like a kept object. Harry had just told him, "I see you, I am not afraid of you, I am doing this, and your cooperation is optional." Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "I think," he said finally, with a care that Harry recognized as genuine, "that you deserve a great deal better than what your family received. And I think," another long pause, "that I owe you an honest accounting, which I am not yet ready to give you but will be." He looked at Harry. "Will you give me time?" Harry thought about it. He thought about it with the specific quality of honesty that Fawkes had always demanded from him, not giving someone what they wanted to hear, not what was strategically convenient, but what was actually true. "Yes," he said. "But I'm not slowing down while I'm waiting." "I wouldn't expect you to," Dumbledore said. Harry stood. He was small, still, the 11-year-old body, hand-me-down robes now replaced by proper ones, Fawkes's impression of his father's height and his mother's eyes, and he stood in Dumbledore's extraordinary office and he was, clearly and entirely, unafraid. Not performing confidence. Not pushing against the old man's gravity. Simply existing outside its pull. "Professor," Harry said, at the door. "The perch." Dumbledore looked at it. His face did something private and complicated. "Fawkes is mine now," Harry said gently. "He was always going to be mine. I think you knew that, even if you didn't know when. He doesn't hold anything against you. Neither do I, yet." He paused. "But I wanted you to hear it said plainly." He left. The door closed quietly behind him. Dumbledore sat for a long time. Outside his window, the autumn sky was deep blue, and somewhere above the castle, a phoenix caught a thermal and soared. That evening in the Gryffindor common room, Harry sat by the fire with Hermione, Ron, and Neville. The room was warm and full of the noise of 20 students and at least 3 ongoing arguments about Quidditch. Fawkes was perched on the back of Harry's chair, his tail feathers hanging down over the armrest in a waterfall of red and gold that Percy Weasley had come to look at twice now with the expression of a man conducting a property assessment. "How did it go?" Hermione asked. She had her book but wasn't reading it. "Well," Harry said. "Did he explain about the co-signature?" "Partially. He'll explain fully when he's ready. I gave him time." Ron looked skeptical. "You gave Dumbledore time. He's going to be more useful as a complicated ally than as a straightforward enemy," Harry said. "And I think he genuinely believes he was protecting people. He thought about it. That's something I can work with." Neville had been quiet through this. He had a particular quality of stillness when he was thinking hard about something, not the stillness of shyness, Harry had come to understand, but the stillness of someone who learned early to stay quiet until they were sure. "My Gran," he said. "She holds our Wisengamot proxy. Augusta Longbottom." Everyone looked at him. "She won't want to come out of retirement," Neville said. "She hasn't attended a session in 7 years. But," he looked at Harry with the direct, measuring quality that Harry had started to recognize as the real Neville, the one underneath the nervous exterior. "If you asked her yourself, and told her what you told me, she'd listen. Gran listens to people who don't hedge." Harry looked at him for a moment. "Would you write to her for me?" Neville's jaw set. "I'll do better than that. I'll go with you." The fire crackled. Fawkes shifted on the chair back. Outside the tower window, the grounds were dark, and the stars over the lake were very bright, and the castle settled around its inhabitants with the patience of stone that has been waiting a long time for this particular set of people to occupy it. Harry looked at his 3 companions, Hermione, who brought precision, Ron, who brought courage that looked like cheerfulness, Neville, who brought the particular quality of someone who has been underestimated long enough to know exactly how useful that is, and felt something clarify in him that had been building since the train. Not a plan exactly. Plans came later, in pieces, responsive to what actually happened. Something more fundamental than a plan. A foundation. Right, he said, leaning back in his chair. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. And the fire burned warm and gold, and Fawkes sang very softly, and Harry Potter began. Chapter 3, What Fire Remembers. November came to Hogwarts like a slow siege. The warmth bled out of the grounds week by week, first from the lake, which went grey and still and stopped reflecting the sky cleanly, then from the lawns, which turned to mud under the feet of students cutting across to herbology. The forest went dark early. The torches in the corridors burned harder against the cold, and the staircases seemed to shift more erratically, as if the castle was restless. Harry didn't mind the cold. He'd slept in the cupboard under the Dursleys' stairs through enough November nights to have made his peace with it. And he had things to do that kept him warm enough. The documents from the sealed Gringotts vaults had arrived by secure goblin courier on the 3rd week of October, 3 large trunks, sealed with blood-ward locks that opened only to Harry's touch. He'd levitated them up to the Phoenix chamber, spread them across the stone floor in rough chronological order, and spent every free hour since going through them with Hermione, who had taken to the work with the single-minded focus of someone who has found the academic project of a lifetime and knows it. The picture that emerged was worse than Harry had expected, and he had expected something fairly bad. The theft of the Phoenix throne had not been a single event. It had been a process, careful, incremental, the kind of dismantling that only works because each individual step looks almost reasonable if you don't stand back to see the whole shape of it. It had begun in 1901 with a ministry commission proposing to modernize the structure of magical governance. The commission's report, which Harry found in the second trunk still in its original ministerial binding, recommended the transfer of the throne's Wizengamot veto power to a newly constituted board of governors. Framed as democratization. The Potter representative at the time, his great-great-grandfather Charles the Elder, had refused to ratify it. The commission had tabled the proposal. And then Charles had died in 1918, in the flu epidemic that took so many wizards along with muggles, and his son Fleamont was 17 and still at Hogwarts, and the ministry had moved. Not violently. Not with dark magic or overt coercion. With paperwork. With the slow, grinding machinery of bureaucratic procedure applied by people who understood that the most durable theft is the kind that doesn't look like theft. The throne's legal status had been reclassified 3 times in 5 years. The sovereignty claim had been designated, disputed, without a formal challenge proceeding, which was, Harry had learned from Hermione, legally equivalent to forging the dispute. The Wizengamot seat had been quietly absorbed into the general membership. And in 1926, when a 19-year-old Fleamont Potter had finally hired a solicitor to challenge the process, the ministry had arranged for the vaults to be sealed with an emergency order, citing security concerns during a period of dark wizard activity. That order bore 2 signatures. The ministry's then senior undersecretary, a man named Hector Fawley. And a junior official, 25 years old, recently appointed as special consultant to the Wizengamot's criminal division. Albus Dumbledore. Harry had stared at that signature for a long time. Not with rage, he'd processed the shape of this already, that day at Gringotts. But with the specific cold clarity of someone looking at a documented fact that changes the accounting of a person's life. Dumbledore had not been tricked into signing it. He had been young, yes, and he had clearly believed what he'd told Harry, that the throne was a target, that the Potters were safer without it, but belief didn't change the outcome. Belief didn't change the signature. Hermione, he said, not looking up from the document. Is there any legal argument that the 1926 order was invalid at the time it was signed? She was 3 feet away in the Phoenix chamber, cross-legged on the floor with her own stack of papers. She didn't look up either. Possibly. The emergency security designation required sign-off from the full Wizengamot Security Committee, not just 2 officials. If they bypassed the committee, she turned a page. Gringotts would have filed that objection. Did they? Harry sorted through his stack. Found it in under 2 minutes, which was either a sign of his organizational system or of how well he'd come to know the shape of this particular catastrophe. Yes. Filed December 1926. Rejected February 1927, citing ministerial override authority under the Emergency Powers Act 1918. Hermione looked up now. The 1918 Emergency Powers Act was a wartime measure. The war had been over for 7 years. Which means the rejection was itself legally questionable. Which means, she said carefully, you potentially have grounds to have the entire 1926 order voided retroactively. Not just disputed, voided. As if it never existed. The Phoenix chamber was quiet except for the wind against the round window and the sound of parchment. Fawkes, perched in his usual spot in the center of the mosaic, made a soft clicking sound that Harry had come to associate with satisfaction. If the order is voided, Harry said, then the throne was never legally removed from Potter control. Which means every piece of legislation passed using the Wisengamot structure that replaced it, is potentially contestable, Hermione said. She set her papers down and looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between academic excitement and genuine alarm. Harry. That's not just the throne. That's 40 years of law. Not all of it, Harry said. Most legislation would survive because the veto was never exercised. The throne's absence doesn't automatically invalidate laws made without it. But the laws that were specifically designed to fill the power vacuum, he thought about it. The blood purity registration requirements introduced in 1930. The magical creature classification laws from 1945. The current structure of the ministry's Aura division. He paused. The Azkaban sentencing guidelines. Another silence. Sirius Black, Hermione said. She'd said it before he had. He'd been thinking it for 3 weeks but hadn't said it out loud, because saying it out loud made it a thing that required immediate action, and he'd needed the documentation sorted first. He looked at her across the spread of papers and old history. He didn't get a trial, Harry said. I found that in the 4th trunk. There's a full ministry record of the arrests made after my parents died. 12 others got hearings. Sirius Black was sent directly to Azkaban. The paperwork cites emergency wartime procedures, the same 1918 Act. Hermione stared at him. He's been there for 10 years. Yes. Based on a procedure that may itself be legally void. Based on a procedure that's legally void, the signature of a minister who's since been disgraced for unrelated corruption, and the testimony of a man who was never cross-examined because there was no trial. Harry set the document down. His case isn't just wrong. It's built entirely on a legal foundation. The wind hit the window. Outside, the November sky was flat and gray and enormous. Harry looked at it for a moment, then back at the papers. I need to get him out, he said. It wasn't a dramatic statement. It was simply the next logical conclusion of everything he'd been reading. Not just because he's my godfather, he's your godfather. Yes. Found that in the 2nd trunk, the will documentation. He'd found it the day before and had sat with it for a while in the specific way that he sat with things that mattered, quietly, letting the shape of it settle into him. Sirius Orion Black, godfather and named guardian, in the event of the deaths of James and Lily Potter. Not just because of that. Because he has been imprisoned through the same illegal mechanism that stole the throne. The same act. The same signatures. It's all connected. Hermione was quiet, organizing this in the way she organized things, not by emotion but by sequence, by what came first and what followed. To get him released, you'd need to present the case for a trial. Which means going before the Wisengamot. Or, Harry said, going around it. Fawkes can carry a message anywhere. Including to Azkaban. To a Dementor prison. The Dementors affect humans, Harry said. He looked at Fawkes. They've never been tested against Phoenix fire. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. That's either brilliant or catastrophically dangerous. Probably both, Harry said. But I'm not sending Fawkes in alone. He paused. I'll write the letter first. Tell Sirius what I know. Give him something to hold on to. He looked at the window again. And then I'll figure out the rest. He wrote the letter that night. Not a short one. Harry did not believe in the kind of brevity that left important things unsaid, and this letter had 10 years of important things to cover. He wrote it in the Phoenix chamber by wandlight, Fawkes on the mosaic and the stone walls carvings lit in orange and shadow, and he wrote it the way his parents had written their letters, directly, warmly, without the performative formality of a child addressing an adult. Dear Sirius, my name is Harry Potter. You are my godfather, and I have been reading my father's letters for the past month, so I know rather a lot about you already. I know you were his best friend from first year. I know you drove a motorbike and once helped him put a permanent sticking charm on a picture of a Welsh green on his dormitory ceiling that was still there when my mother visited in 6th year. I know he trusted you completely. I also know you didn't betray them. I have the documentation. All of it. I am 11 years old, and I am Fawkes's bonded companion, the Phoenix you may remember from the night at Godric's Hollow. I have opened the sealed Potter vaults, I am in the process of restoring the Phoenix throne, and I intend to get you out of Azkaban. I am writing this letter first because you deserve to know that someone knows the truth before they know anything else about their rescue. My father would have wanted that. Tell me you're all right, or tell me you're not, either way, tell me the truth. I can take it. Harry he sealed it with the Potter signet, found in the vault, a dark iron ring with the Phoenix crest, which fit his hand better than an 11-year-old's ring should have, and gave it to Fawkes. The Phoenix held it in his beak for a moment, looking at Harry. I know it's Azkaban, Harry said. I know what's there. I trust you. Fawkes spread his wings, and the fire that came off him was brighter than usual, a conscious thing, Harry thought, a deliberate stoke of the bond flame to carry against whatever lived in that place, and then he was gone, through the window and into the November dark. Harry sat alone in the Phoenix chamber for a while, looking at the carvings. His father smiled out at him from one of them, not a portrait, not a moving image, but a carved figure young enough to be barely recognizable as James Potter, standing at what Harry assumed was his own coronation ceremony, though it had never happened. The carvings showed the ceremony that should have been. His father. His grandfather. All the way back. Harry was not the kind of person who wept in private while performing public composure. He'd never seen much point in the performance part. But he sat alone in the Phoenix chamber with his father's carved face and his mother's absence and 10 years of Fawkes's lullabies, and something moved through him that he simply let move, because Fawkes had taught him that grief was not a wall you built around or a thing you managed. It was a fire that burned clean if you let it, and left something solid behind. He sat there until it passed. Then he went to bed. Fawkes came back the next morning before breakfast, materializing on Harry's bedpost with a singed tail feather and carrying a folded piece of parchment that had clearly been torn from somewhere. The edge was ragged, and Harry didn't want to think too hard about where parchment came from in Azkaban. The writing was cramped and shaky, but legible. It had the quality of someone who has been holding themselves together by sheer will for so long that will has become structural. Harry. I have been in this place for 10 years without a trial. I have held on to one thing, the knowledge that Pettigrew is alive. Your parents' secret keeper was Peter Pettigrew, not me. They switched at the last minute, without telling anyone. James thought it would be safer. Pettigrew betrayed them. Pettigrew is the rat. I don't know if that means anything to you yet. It will. The fact that you exist, that you are who you say you are, that Fawkes found you and stayed. I held on to his fire for 20 minutes after the Dementors drove it back and I felt more like a human being than I have in a decade. You sound exactly like James. It's going to make me cry and I refuse. Tell me your plan. All of it. Don't soften anything. Sirius. Harry read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in his inside pocket. Then he went to breakfast and ate eggs and toast and drank 2 cups of tea, because he was going to need the energy. The rat. He turned it over while he ate. Peter Pettigrew, name in the vault documents, one of his father's 4 closest friends, listed in the Order of the Phoenix records as deceased, killed by Sirius Black when Black supposedly cornered him in a street after the Potters' deaths. Except Sirius hadn't killed him. Which meant Pettigrew had staged his own death and run. To something. Or to someone. A rat, Sirius had written. Your parents' secret keeper was Peter Pettigrew. Harry looked up from his plate, across the Great Hall, to the Gryffindor table where Ron Weasley was currently eating an enormous quantity of sausages and had a fat grey rat sitting on his shoulder that he'd introduced on the train as Scabbers, owned by his brother Percy first, old for a rat, practically ancient actually, Ron had said. Practically ancient for a rat. Harry looked at the rat. The rat appeared to be eating a piece of toast that had fallen from Ron's plate, unbothered and domestic. Harry put down his fork very carefully, and thought about the fact that Sirius had said Pettigrew is the rat and how the phrase bore 2 possible meanings, and chose, with the particular quality of decision that felt less like choosing and more like seeing, to address it later. This morning he had classes. And a letter to write to Augusta Longbottom, which Neville had agreed to co-sign. One thing at a time. Augusta Longbottom's reply arrived on a Friday. It was written on heavy cream parchment in the decisive, angular hand of a woman who has never questioned the weight her words should carry. It was 4 sentences long. Mr. Potter. My grandson tells me you have your mother's directness. Come to Longbottom Manor on the 15th of November at 2 o'clock. Don't be late. Harry showed it to Neville, who read it and said, that's basically a love letter from Gran. They went on the 15th, with permission obtained from McGonagall, who had looked at Harry for a long time before signing the Hogsmeade outing pass and said, with a precision that suggested she knew rather more than she was acknowledging, do try not to set anything in motion that can't be walked back, Mr. Potter, and Fawkes, who came as a matter of course and who Augusta Longbottom, to her credit, greeted without audible surprise. Longbottom Manor was old and well-kept and smelled of lavender and cut stone. Augusta herself was precisely what her letter had suggested, a woman in her late 60s with the bearing of a general and eyes that assessed everything they landed on with the detached precision of a livestock auctioneer. She wore a magnificent hat with a stuffed vulture on it that nodded slightly as she moved. Harry shook her hand and said, "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Longbottom," and she looked at him for 3 full seconds before sitting down. "You've opened the sealed vaults," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." "You found the 1926 order." "Yes." "And Dumbledore's signature." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I have known about that signature for 40 years, she said. "I found it in my late husband's papers. He was a Wisengamot member from 1950 and he spent considerable effort trying to understand the legal standing of the sovereignty question. He concluded that the order was legally questionable at best and outright fraudulent at worst." She looked at Harry. "He died without being able to do anything about it. The political climate was, a pause. Those of us who cared about the question had larger problems to manage. Voldemort's first rise. And after?" Her jaw tightened. "After, there was the question of my son and daughter-in-law." She said it without visible emotion, which was the most honest form of that particular kind of pain. "And then the question of raising Neville." She glanced at her grandson, who was sitting very straight in his chair beside Harry with the careful posture of someone trying to take up the correct amount of space. Her expression, when it touched him, was fiercely proud in a way she clearly didn't think of as an expression at all. "I have not been idle about the Wisengamot seat," she said, looking back at Harry. "I have simply been waiting for a claimant with enough standing to make the acknowledgement meaningful." "I have the Gringotts documentation and the blood bond," Harry said. "I know. I read the Prophet. A beat. What I need to know is whether you understand what you're asking me to do. A formal acknowledgement before the Wisengamot is not a quiet filing. It is a public declaration with political consequences. There are members of that body who have spent decades benefiting from the current arrangement. Standing up and saying the Phoenix throne has a living, bond-verified heir will make enemies." "I know," Harry said. Enemies with significant resources. I know. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at Fawkes. The phoenix met her gaze with the steady gold attention he gave to everyone he deemed worth measuring, which was itself a kind of endorsement. Her chin came up slightly. Who else are you approaching? She asked. I have letters out to 4 other Wizengamot members. I need 5 acknowledgements. 2 have responded positively, the Macmillan family and Madame Longbottom, I mean, you, if you agree. The other 2 I'm still waiting on. He paused. I also have a matter that bears on the Wizengamot that I'd like your advice on. Sirius Black, she said. He hadn't mentioned Sirius. He looked at her. Frank trusted Sirius Black, she said simply. I never believed the official story. A man who would die for the Potters doesn't turn around and sell them for favors from a Dark Lord. The logic doesn't hold. She leaned forward slightly. Is he alive? Yes. Is he sane? Harry thought about the handwriting on that scrap of parchment. The cramped, controlled, deliberate quality of it. 10 years in Azkaban and still able to give a clear account and still telling Harry not to soften anything. He's intact, Harry said. More than he should be. Azkaban was never a legal sentencing, Augusta said. Wartime emergency procedure applied 9 months after the war ended. I said so at the time and was overruled. She sat back. What you are building, Mr. Potter, is a case that touches several different injustices that stem from the same root. The 1918 Act, applied beyond its scope. The 1926 Order, fraudulently executed. The Black sentencing, procedurally void. She looked at him. You understand that Dumbledore's name appears in all 3. Yes. And you are still attending his school. I find it useful, Harry said. Something flickered in Augusta Longbottom's eyes that might, in another woman, have been a smile. Your father was the same way, she said. James Potter could be in the middle of an argument with someone and still accept everything useful they had to offer without letting the argument change. She stood. I will provide the 5th acknowledgement, in writing, submitted formally before the Wizengamot in January. Give me until Christmas to prepare the supporting documentation. I have resources of my own that you may not have found yet. Harry stood. Thank you, Mrs. Longbottom. She waved this off. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it works. She looked at Neville. Well done, she said, which was clearly the highest possible commendation in her vocabulary, because Neville went bright red and sat even straighter. The troll happened on Halloween. Harry dealt with it in about 4 minutes. He hadn't been planning to be heroic, he'd been on his way back from the Phoenix Chamber when the smell hit him, and then he'd heard Hermione's voice from the girls' bathroom, and the thing about Harry Potter was that he didn't have the particular paralysis that grips most people at the onset of a crisis, the moment where the brain says this cannot be happening and stalls. His brain said troll and his feet were already moving. He came through the bathroom door with Fawkes on his shoulder and the phoenix lit up like a torch, and the troll had Hermione backed against the sinks and was raising its club. Harry pointed his wand at the troll's ankles and said Wingardium Leviosa with the easy precision of someone who had practiced it until it felt like a thought rather than a spell, and the club swung upward out of the troll's grip and hit it firmly on the top of the head. The troll sat down on the bathroom floor looking puzzled. Hermione stared at him. You all right? Harry asked. Yes. She looked at the troll, which was now cross-eyed. How did you? I came in here to cry, it's not like I was expecting, I know. Ron said something stupid, didn't he? She blinked. He said I was a nightmare and no wonder I had no friends. Harry looked at Ron, who had appeared in the doorway and was looking at the sitting troll with the expression of a man catching up very quickly on several simultaneous things. That was unkind, Harry said. I know, Ron said. He looked at Hermione with the uncomfortable directness of someone who has been raised by a woman like Molly Weasley and therefore cannot actually maintain a dishonest position for long. I'm sorry. It was a rubbish thing to say. Hermione's chin lifted slightly. Apology noted, she said, with the specific dignity of someone who has decided to be gracious without making it easy. Thank you for coming to help. Technically I didn't help, Ron said. Harry handled the whole thing in about 30 seconds. Still. You came. They looked at each other across the unconscious troll with the slightly tentative quality of people who are in the process of deciding to be friends, and Harry watched this with the quiet warmth of someone who finds the formation of genuine connections one of the better things the world has to offer. McGonagall arrived. Took one look at the troll, at Harry, at Fawkes, and at the two other students present, and said, "Please tell me you didn't, Wingardium Leviosa," Harry said. "Club on head. No casualties." McGonagall looked at him for a moment with the expression she deployed when she was experiencing an emotion she hadn't budgeted for. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said. Each? Ron asked. Don't push it, Mr. Weasley. Quirrell was getting worse. Harry noticed it in the way he noticed most things, not in a single moment of revelation but through the accumulation of small signals. The man was jumpy in November in a way that had not been there in September. His office smelled different. The wrongness Harry had clocked in their first lesson had not resolved but intensified, layered, as if whatever was living under the turban was growing more demanding. He mentioned it to Hermione one evening in early December. They were in the library, technically doing Charm's homework, actually doing what they always ended up doing, which was the work they decided mattered more. He goes up to the 3rd floor, Hermione said, without looking up. I've seen him twice now, after curfew. He has a key. Everyone has a key, Ron said from across the table. It's Hogwarts. The teachers, not to the locked corridor, Hermione said. That lock is specific. I looked it up. It's a modified blood ward, the kind that responds to individual magical signature. Quirrell has been keyed in. She looked up. Which means Dumbledore gave him access. Which either means Dumbledore trusts him or he wants to see if Quirrell goes for it, Harry said. They both looked at him. The stone, Harry said. Whatever's on the 3rd floor, I think it's a stone. Nicholas Flamel's stone, probably. I found a reference in the vault documents to a correspondence between my grandfather and Flamel about exactly that, the intersection of Phoenix fire and the Philosopher's Stone. He watched their expressions. I think Dumbledore is using the stone as bait. And I think whatever is living in Quirrell is the thing he's baiting. Voldemort, Hermione said quietly. Yes. The word sat on the table between them. Ron had gone pale but held himself steady. Neville, who had joined them 20 minutes ago and was quietly reading over Hermione's shoulder, did not visibly react, which Harry had come to understand was Neville's version of bracing. What do we do? Ron asked. Harry thought about it. Not yet, he said. I want to watch the pattern. And I want to write to Dumbledore. Write to Dumbledore, Hermione said, in the tone of a repetition that is also a question. He's running a trap, Harry said. I want him to know I've seen it. That changes the dynamic between us, we've been circling each other since October. This, he paused. This is actually useful. If he's using the stone as bait for whatever remains of Voldemort, then we have a shared interest in the outcome. He looked at them all. And shared interests are leverage. He wrote to Dumbledore that night. Short, direct, 3 sentences. I know about the stone. I know about Quirrell. I'd like to discuss what I can contribute. He signed it with the Potter's signet stamp and gave it to Fawkes. Dumbledore's reply came back within the hour. 4 words. Come see me tomorrow. Harry was smiling as he folded it. The second Gringotts letter came in the 2nd week of December. It was from Ripclaw, and it was concise and significant. The bank had completed its review of Harry's legal documentation. The case for retroactive voiding of the 1926 ministry order was strong, Gringotts was prepared to submit a formal brief to the International Confederation of Wizards asserting that the Phoenix Throne's removal from Potter control had been executed illegally under British law. The ICW brief would, if upheld, supersede any domestic ministry objection. There was a second item. We have also completed our inventory of the estate's outstanding assets. One item requires your direct attention. Vault 713, currently leased by Hogwarts School to Gringotts for safekeeping, contains an artifact that appears in your estate's original inventory as a Potter ancestral property, transferred to outside custody in 1927 under the same 1926 order's derivative authority. We cannot disclose the specific artifact in writing. We request that you visit the bank at your earliest convenience. Harry read the letter 3 times. Vault 713. He'd read about that vault in the Prophet earlier in the term, a break-in attempt, failed, vault found empty. Dumbledore had already moved whatever was inside before anyone could get to it. The stone had been in a Potter vault. He sat with this for a long while in the Phoenix chamber, the stone walls of the carvings lit by Fawkes' warmth. The pattern of the thing was becoming clearer, piece by piece. The Philosopher's Stone, ancestral Potter property. Removed in 1927 under the same illegal order. Placed in Hogwarts, ostensibly for safekeeping. Used now as a trap. By a man who, at 25, had co-signed the order that took it. Harry was not angry about this in the volcanic, consuming way. He had noticed, about himself, that his anger had a quality of clarification rather than heat, it made things sharper, not louder. What he felt now was sharp and clear and, underneath it, something that was not quite sadness but was adjacent to it. The waste of it. The accumulated weight of decisions made by a man who was brilliant and genuinely good-intentioned and had still, through the mechanism of his own certainty, managed to steal half a century from an entire family. He looked at his father's carved face on the wall. "I'm going to fix this," he said, and his voice was steady. "All of it. I promise." Fawkes sang. Not the full song, just the opening phrase, the one that always sounded to Harry less like a beginning and more like a confirmation. "Yes. I know. I believe you." The last week before Christmas break, Harry wrote 4 letters. One to Sirius, an update, honest and complete, telling him about Augusta Longbottom's commitment, about the ICW brief, about Pettigrew, and yes, Harry told him, he knew about the rat, and Ron's rat specifically, and he had a plan for that which would need to wait until the legal groundwork was stronger but was not forgotten. "You are not going to stay in Azkaban," he wrote. "I need you to know that with the same certainty I know anything." One to Ripclaw at Gringotts, confirming his receipt of the letter and his intention to visit over the Christmas holidays with his full legal documentation. One to the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement, not to the minister, this time, but directly to the head of the department, citing specific procedural code and requesting, formally, a review of the black sentencing on the grounds of procedural void. He attached a copy of the relevant section of his Gringotts documentation. And one to Dumbledore, separate from the conversation they'd had in his office, a longer letter, private and without the particular tension of a face-to-face meeting. He told the headmaster what he'd found in the vault documents. Not accusatorially. Simply. "I want you to understand what I'm looking at, because I think you owe it to yourself to know the full picture of what was done in 1926 and in the years after. I don't know if you've ever seen it laid out all at once. I think you should." He attached copies of the key documents. All of them, including the ones with Dumbledore's signature. He gave the letters to Fawkes one by one, and Fawkes carried each one out into the cold December air without hesitation, and Harry watched him go from the Phoenix chamber window until the last flash of gold vanished against the grey sky. Behind him, the carved wall showed his history in stone. In front of him, the window showed the future in weather. He stood between them for a while, and he was not afraid of either. Ron found him there an hour later, which meant he'd climbed all the way to the top of Gryffindor Tower on a Wednesday evening for no particular reason except that Harry had been gone too long. "Hermione thinks you're plotting," Ron said, looking around the Phoenix chamber with the slightly reverent expression he always had in it. I said you're probably just thinking. Both, Harry said. Ron looked at the carvings. He'd been up here enough times now that he'd stopped craning his neck at everything, but Harry had noticed he always looked at the same spot on the wall, the image of the early Wizengamot, pre-throne's removal, where there was a figure Harry had identified from other documents as an early Weasley ancestor standing in the outer ring. Ron had never mentioned it. Harry had never brought it up, because it was Ron's thing to name if he wanted to. Do you think it'll work? Ron asked. Not skeptically. With the genuine quality of someone who has decided to believe in something and wants confirmation they're not being foolish. Yes, Harry said. Not easily. Not all at once. But yes. Augusta Longbottom wrote Neville again, Ron said. She's apparently been writing to 3 other Wizengamot members she knows. She doesn't ask, she just informs them of things. He says that's how she's always been. He also says she told him she's proud of him and he cried in the dormitory for about 10 minutes. Harry smiled. Good. Also, Ron said, I know about Scabbers. Harry looked at him. Ron was looking at the wall, not at Harry. His jaw was set in the way of someone who has been working up to something. I don't know everything, he said. But I've had him since I was 3, and he's older than any rat should be, and after everything you told us about Pettigrew, he stopped. I think I've been carrying him around for 3 years and not letting myself think too hard about it. Harry let him have the silence. When you're ready to deal with it, Ron said, I'm ready. Harry looked at his friend, at the freckled, straight-backed, honestly brave person who had shown up at a Phoenix chamber door because he'd been gone too long, who had apologized to Hermione in the troll bathroom without being asked, who was now standing in front of the carving of his ancestor and offering to help dismantle a comfortable lie, and felt something that was specifically, cleanly gratitude. Okay, Harry said. After Christmas. We do it properly. Ron nodded. Then he looked at the window, which was letting in a cold sharp draft. Can we go back down? It's freezing up here and I've got biscuits from Mum in my trunk. Harry laughed, a genuine, uncomplicated laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere warm. Yeah, he said. Let's go. Fawkes, coming back through the window just as they left, brushed his wing lightly across Harry's shoulder as he passed. Just once, just briefly. A confirmation. Harry reached up and touched the warm feathers. The door to the Phoenix chamber clicked shut behind them, and the carvings on the wall glowed softly in the dark for a long moment before the light faded. Chapter 4, The King's Gambit. The Ministry of Magic at Christmas was a different creature than the Ministry at full operational capacity. Half the atrium's usual foot traffic was gone, replaced by a skeleton staff and the particular quiet of an institution that has sent most of its people home and is running on maintenance. The enchanted ceiling showed a flat winter gray. The golden fountain at the center, wizard, witch, centaur, goblin, house elf arranged in the particular hierarchy that Harry had read about in his vault documents and found revealing, was still running but nobody was dropping coins in it. The echoes were longer than usual. Harry walked through the atrium on the 23rd of December with Sirius Black at his side. Not literally. Not yet. But effectively. The story of how Sirius had come to be standing in the Ministry's own processing hall rather than a Dementor cell deserved its full telling, which was roughly this. Harry had gone to Gringotts on the 19th, as planned, and had sat with Ripclaw for 2 hours going through the Vault 713 documentation and confirming what he already knew, that the Philosopher's Stone was ancestral Potter property, that its removal had been derivative of the void 1926 order, that Gringotts was prepared to assert this claim to the ICW in the new year. He'd signed the papers. On the way out, he'd stopped at the bank's legal department and filed, formally and in person, the demand for a judicial review of Sirius Black's sentencing. Not a request. A demand, backed by the estate's full legal standing, citing 6 specific procedural violations and attaching the ICW draft brief that made the domestic ministry's authority over the matter genuinely questionable. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had responded the same day. Harry was fairly certain this was because they'd received both his pre-Christmas letter and the Gringotts' demand within 48 hours of each other, and someone in the department had looked at the combined legal weight and decided that the last thing they needed in January was an ICW hearing about their sentencing procedures. The response had been carefully worded, cautious, and ultimately a yes. Sirius Black would be transferred to ministry custody pending a formal review hearing, to be held January the 3rd. Harry had sent Sirius a letter with one line. The 3rd. Prepare your account. Don't omit anything. And Sirius had sent back 2 words. Already written. So here was December 23rd, and Harry was not in the ministry yet. He was in the atrium, waiting, because the transfer hadn't happened and he'd come to watch it happen, because some things you needed to witness in person to make real. Hermione was beside him. She'd refused to go to her parents for Christmas until this was done, which had required a conversation with her parents that Harry had not been present for but which Hermione reported had gone fine, meaning her parents had trusted her judgment, which they generally did because she had generally earned it. Ron was on Harry's other side, wearing his new Weasley jumper, maroon, slightly too large, with an R on it that his mother had knitted with obvious love and no particular interest in his aesthetic preferences. He'd tried to leave it at home. He was wearing it anyway. Neville was there too. Augusta had come with him, in her magnificent hat, and was standing slightly apart from the group with the bearing of a woman who has been in this building countless times and has opinions about all of it. At 9:47 in the morning, a door opened at the far end of the atrium and 6 Aurors came through in the loose formation that meant they were escorting rather than arresting. In the middle of the formation, a man walked. He was thin. More than thin, worn down to something fundamental, the way a river rock is worn by years of water into its purest shape. He was 40, approximately, though he looked older than that, with hollow cheeks and dark shadows under grey eyes and hair that hung lank and grey-streaked to his shoulders. He walked with the careful quality of someone reminding their body how legs work after a long period of forgetting. But his eyes were clear. That was the thing Harry noticed first and held on to. His eyes were completely, startlingly clear, alive in the way that 10 years of Dementor should have made impossible, burning with something that was either fury or love or the point at which those two things become the same. Sirius Black found Harry across the width of the atrium in about half a second. Harry walked toward him. The Aurors tensed, then relaxed, because the boy walking toward their charge was 11 years old and unhurried, and the phoenix on his shoulder was making a sound that was doing something to the air quality that nobody could quite name but that made everyone in the vicinity feel, for no obvious reason, that things were going to be all right. They stopped 2 feet apart. Sirius looked at him, all of him, the green eyes, the black hair, the scar, the way he held himself, the phoenix, and his throat moved. "You look like James," Sirius said, hoarse. "So I'm told," Harry said. He paused. "You look terrible." A sound came out of Sirius that was clearly a laugh, though it was rough and unpracticed, like an engine turning over after long disuse. 10 years in Azkaban will do that. He looked at Fawkes. "Hello, old friend." Fawkes regarded him with calm gold eyes and sang one long, warm note. It wasn't the full song. It was specifically the phrase Harry had learned to translate as "welcome back," the one the Phoenix reserved for returns rather than greetings, for the restoration of something that had been absent. Sirius Black closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he looked slightly less like a man holding himself together by will alone. "We should get you somewhere warm," Harry said. "There's a hearing on the 3rd. We'll need to prepare." Sirius looked at him for another moment, and the complicated thing moving in his expression was something Harry didn't try to categorize. He didn't need to. Some things didn't need naming. "Lead the way," Sirius said. Harry turned and walked back across the atrium. Sirius fell into step beside him. They used a ministry conference room that Augusta Longbottom had requisitioned through a network of professional relationships that Harry was increasingly in awe of. She had been, in her prime, a formidable political operator, and she moved through the ministry's bureaucratic geography with the precision of someone who has memorized every shortcut and every landmine. The conference room had a long table, a whiteboard, both magical and functional, and windows looking out over the Thames, which was grey and beautiful and moving. Sirius ate 3 sandwiches in the time it took Harry to arrange his documents. He ate them with focused efficiency, not performing hunger but simply attending to a body that had been inadequately served for 10 years. Harry noticed this and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say and because Sirius clearly didn't want commentary on it. After the 3rd sandwich, Sirius wiped his hands on the provided napkin, leaned back in his chair, and said, "All right. Tell me everything." So Harry did. He told it in sequence and without editorial: the Gringotts Vaults, the 1926 Order, the Phoenix Throne, the ICW Brief, Pettigrew, the hearing on the 3rd, the 5 Wisengamot acknowledgements that were now confirmed. He talked for 40 minutes without significant interruption, and Sirius listened the way Harry had learned to recognize as genuine listening, not waiting for his turn to speak but actually tracking, following, processing. Occasionally his jaw tightened or his hands flattened on the table, but he didn't break in. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment. "You're 11, he said. "Yes. You've been doing this since September." "Since before September, technically. The groundwork started when I was 10. Sirius stared at him. "When you were 10. "Fawkes had been showing me the shape of things for years," Harry said. "I just needed access to the documentation to make it actionable." He paused. "And a wand." Another silence. Sirius looked at the document spread across the table, at the phoenix perched on Harry's chair back, at the faces around the table, Hermione with her notepad, Ron with his Weasley jumper, Neville with his grandmother's posture, Augusta Longbottom with her vulture hat. James would have, he stopped. Tried again. Lily would have, he couldn't finish that one either. "I know," Harry said. Gently, and meaning it. "I read their letters. I know what they were like." He looked at Sirius directly. "I know what you were like together. What you all were." He paused. "I want you to know it wasn't lost. Not completely. I know who they were." Sirius's jaw moved. He looked at the window. The Thames moved outside, grey and constant. "Okay," he said, after a moment. His voice was level. "The hearing on the 3rd. Walk me through it." "Pettigrew first," Harry said. "Your account establishes the switch. I have documentation from my father's correspondence that proves the secret keeper was changed. There's a letter from my father to a contact in the order where he references the new arrangement without naming Pettigrew specifically, but the date aligns exactly. That plus your testimony. Plus Scabbers," Ron said. He said it with the flat determination of someone who has made their decision and isn't revisiting it. Sirius turned to look at him. Something in his face shifted, recognition, then something careful. "You're a Weasley." "Ron," he said. "Arthur's youngest son." Sirius looked at him. "You know what I'm saying when I say Scabbers." "Yes," Ron said. "And I know it's Pettigrew and I've been carrying him around for 3 years, and I'd very much like to stop." He met Sirius's gaze with the straightforward quality that Harry had come to think of as Ron's particular courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself but doesn't back down either. "Tell me how to catch him without him disappearing." Sirius looked at the boy for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the atrium, something in his face moved that was unambiguously and fully a smile. "You can't grab him fast enough in human form," he said. "But I can catch him before he transforms. I'm an animagus." Hermione's head came up. "You're an unregistered animagus." "I was." He looked at Harry. "I'll register. After the hearing. I want everything above board from here." "What's your form?" Neville asked, which was the most words he'd said in the last hour, delivered with the careful curiosity of someone who finds this specific detail significant. "Large black dog," Sirius said. Answers a few questions about the Ministry's wanted posters, doesn't it? Does Dumbledore know? Harry asked. Dumbledore knows everything, Sirius said, and the flatness in his voice on that name was the first real bitterness Harry had heard from him. Whether he'd have mentioned it to anyone useful is a different question. He's coming to the hearing, Augusta said, from her end of the table. She said it the way she said most things, as information, delivered without editorial. I received a letter from him yesterday. He intends to testify. The room was quiet. Harry had wondered about this. He'd known Dumbledore would engage, the man didn't stay out of things that mattered, it wasn't in his nature, but the form the engagement would take had been less clear. Coming to testify at Sirius's hearing was a significant move. It meant, publicly, putting his own credibility behind the proceedings. Interesting, Harry said. It's more than interesting, Augusta said. Albus Dumbledore testifying in support of a review hearing will make it very difficult for the Ministry to drag its feet. His political capital in that building is still considerable. She looked at Harry over her spectacles. Whatever else you may think of him, he is making a choice to be useful. I know, Harry said. He'd read the letter Dumbledore had sent him after the package of documentation. It had been long, careful, and full of the specific quality of a man who is looking at something he's avoided looking at directly for a long time. It hadn't contained an apology. Not yet. But it had contained something that was the precondition of one, acknowledgement. A full, unhedged acknowledgement of what the documentation showed, and what role he had played in it, and the words, I do not yet know how to adequately account for this. I am trying to understand the full shape of what I did. I ask for your patience while I do. Harry had written back, take the time you need. Then we talk. That conversation was still coming. He was still waiting for Dumbledore to be ready, and he was still, genuinely, prepared to give him the time. But he was watching. The hearing on January 3rd was held in Courtroom 10. Harry had read about Courtroom 10 in the estate documents, because the Potter sovereignty had included a seat in this room, and his great-great-grandfather had last occupied it in 1916. It was underground, windowless, lit by torches, and had the atmosphere of a place that had witnessed a great deal of suffering and absorbed it into the walls. The stone tiers of seating rose in a full circle, and at the center there was a chair with chains on the armrests. The chains, currently, were lying flat. Sirius Black sat in a chair without visible anxiety, which was remarkable given that the last time he'd been in this room, he hadn't been. He'd been sent to Azkaban without ever sitting in this chair, without ever seeing the inside of this room. He sat in it now with the deliberate quality of someone occupying a space that should have been theirs a decade ago, and his clear grey eyes moved around the assembled Wizengamot with the steady attention of a man who is done being afraid of institutions. Harry sat in the gallery. He had requested a seat rather than the floor, on the grounds that this was Sirius's hearing and the story should be Sirius's to tell. He wanted to watch. Beside him, Hermione had her notepad. Ron had his arms crossed. Neville was very still. Augusta was in the Wizengamot proper, in the Longbottom seat, because this was exactly the kind of hearing for which she had come out of retirement. Madame Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, sharp-eyed and monocled, radiating the specific quality of someone who finds procedural correctness genuinely important rather than merely convenient, opened the proceedings. The evidence was presented methodically. The procedural objections first. Harry's solicitor, a small goblin-trained wizard named Perscores, laid out the 6 procedural violations with the clean precision of a man who has had this argument ready for months and is now deploying it with immense professional satisfaction. The emergency wartime provisions, applied 9 months post-war. The missing sign-off from the Security Committee. The absent cross-examination. The lack of a formal charge sheet. Madame Bones's expression, through this, was unreadable. But she was taking notes. Then Sirius spoke. He spoke for 2 hours. Harry had read the written account and thought he'd understood the shape of it, but hearing Sirius Black tell it in this room, his voice, regaining its fullness as he went, starting rough and ending something closer to the natural register of the man, which was warm and precise and carried something underneath it that Harry associated with his father's letters. A certain quality of person who loves fiercely and articulates it poorly and doesn't particularly care, was a different experience. He told about the secret keeper switch. He told about the night he'd gone to confront Pettigrew and Pettigrew had blown up the street and transformed. He told about 10 years in Azkaban and what it had taken, daily, to maintain enough of himself to survive. He told it without self-pity, which was what made it devastating. When he described Fawkes visiting him in the cell, the 15 minutes of Phoenix fire holding back the Dementors long enough for him to feel human again, Harry saw 3 Wizengamot members exchange a look. Not the look of people constructing political calculations. The look of people whose hearts have just done something involuntary. Dumbledore testified last. He stood before the assembled Wizengamot in his blue robes and his magnificent white beard and his half-moon glasses, and he said with the full weight of his considerable credibility, "I was Sirius Black's character witness at the time of his arrest. I was never asked to testify. I was told the matter was resolved. I have, in subsequent review of the relevant documentation, concluded that I should have pressed harder, that I knew enough to ask harder questions than I asked, and that my failure to do so contributed to 10 years of unjust imprisonment. I am here to say, unequivocally, that the Sirius Black I have known since he was a student in this school is not a man who would betray the Potters. I have never believed otherwise." The room was quiet when he finished. Harry watched Dumbledore from the gallery. The old man did not look at him during the testimony, but when he returned to his seat, his gaze moved briefly to the gallery, and Harry held it for a moment. What passed between them was not forgiveness, not yet, that was a longer road, but something like acknowledgement. Both of them, simultaneously, knowing exactly where they stood. Madame Bones called for a recess of 1 hour. She came back in 45 minutes. On the evidence presented, she said, in a voice that carried the specific authority of a person who finds the right answer and states it regardless of the political weather, this body finds that the imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black was executed in violation of 6 specific procedural requirements of the Magical Law Enforcement Code. His imprisonment is hereby declared void. She looked at Sirius over her monocle. "Mr. Black, you are free." The chains on the armrests lay flat and still, and Sirius Black stood up from the chair, and Harry, watching from the gallery, felt something settle in his chest with the finality of a stone dropped into deep water. Ron made a sound that was suspiciously like a cheer and suppressed it badly. Hermione was writing very fast. Neville exhaled slowly. Fawkes, from Harry's shoulder, sang 4 notes, clear and brief and definitive, a punctuation rather than a melody. The confrontation with Lucius Malfoy didn't wait until they were out of the building. Harry had been expecting it in the abstract. Malfoy had been present in the Wizengamot gallery for the hearing, which was not surprising since the Malfoy family held a Wizengamot seat, and Harry had watched him through the proceedings with the same measuring attention he'd given everyone. Lucius Malfoy was exactly what his vault documents and his face suggested, a man of considerable intelligence and considerable investment in the world, staying exactly as it was, dressed in robes that were both immaculate and a statement, carrying himself with the ease of someone who has never had to adjust their default settings for anyone in the room. Until now. He caught Harry in the corridor outside courtroom 10, which was not an accident. Harry was walking with Sirius, not touching, because Sirius was still in the process of occupying his own body at normal scale, and Hermione was on his other side, and Lucius Malfoy stepped forward from a small group of ministry officials in a way that required everyone else to stop. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was smooth and warm and entirely fake. "What a significant morning you've managed." Harry looked at him. He had the blonde son standing slightly behind him, Draco, the boy from the Slytherin table, who was watching Harry with an expression that was trying to be contemptuous and was, underneath it, extremely interested. "Lucius Malfoy," Harry said. He said it in the same pleasant, neutral tone Malfoy had used, which had the effect of turning the greeting into an assessment. "I've been reading about your family." Something moved in Malfoy's pale eyes. "Have you?" The Malfoy seat on the Wisengamot dates to 1928, Harry said. 1 year after the Phoenix Throne's sovereignty was removed and the Wisengamot restructured to fill the vacuum. The seat itself was created as part of that restructuring. He looked at Malfoy with green eyes that were purely interested and not the least bit provocative, because he didn't need to be provocative about facts. Interesting timing. Malfoy's expression didn't change. He had, Harry granted him, extraordinary control. You're pursuing a claim that would be, he chose the word with the care of someone picking a safe path through unstable ground, disruptive to a functioning system. I imagine the rest of the Wisengamot shares my curiosity about what exactly you intend. They're welcome to ask me directly, Harry said. I'll be taking my family's Wisengamot seat in the spring session. They can ask me anything they like. A pause. The corridor was not empty, ministry personnel were moving past, and several had slowed without quite stopping. You're a second-year student, Malfoy said. I'm a Phoenix-bonded heir with a Gringotts recognition document and 5 formal acknowledgements, Harry said. The Wisengamot charter doesn't specify an age requirement for a sovereignty seat. Hermione looked it up. I did, Hermione confirmed, from beside Harry. Draco Malfoy made a small sound. His father did not look at him. The families who benefit from the current structure, Lucius began, will continue to benefit from any structure built on sound legal foundation, Harry said. I'm not here to take anything that isn't mine. I'm here to take back what is. He held Malfoy's gaze with the steady, unblinking quality that had been unnerving adults since he was 3. The Malfoy seat is legitimate. It was created during a period of illegal reorganization, yes, but its existence doesn't depend on the Phoenix Throne's absence. I've looked at the charter language specifically. Your family's standing in the Wisengamot is safe. He paused. As long as your family's standing in the Wisengamot is earned. The silence that followed was the kind that means something has shifted and everyone in earshot knows it. Lucius Malfoy was very still. Behind him, Draco was looking at Harry with an expression that had abandoned the attempt at contempt entirely and was now just nakedly, acutely attentive. We will be watching your proceedings with great interest, Mr. Potter, Lucius said, finally. I'd expect nothing less, Harry said. He glanced briefly at Draco, who met his eyes and then looked away, and then he looked back at Lucius. Have a good Christmas, Mr. Malfoy. He walked on. Sirius fell into step beside him, and when they'd rounded the corridor, Sirius said quietly, that was, direct, Hermione said. It was direct. Harry, you just told the second most politically powerful man in Britain that his family's seat is contingent on behavior. It is, Harry said. I know. But, she paused, organizing her thoughts. You gave him 2 things simultaneously. A threat and a reassurance. That's a complex message. I know, Harry said. I wanted him to have both. If I only threaten him, he becomes an enemy with nothing to lose. If I give him a reason to cooperate, he has something to protect. He thought about it. Lucius Malfoy is intelligent and self-interested. Self-interest is workable. It's the true believers who are harder. Sirius looked at him sideways. How old did you say you were? 12, Harry said. He'd had his birthday in July. In February. Merlin's beard, Sirius said softly. The spring Wisengamot session was on the 2nd of March, and Harry Potter walked into the Wisengamot chamber for the first time as its youngest sitting member, with Fawkes on his shoulder and his father's signet ring on his hand and the Gringotts recognition document filed with the chamber's official record. The chamber was circular, deep, older than most of the ministry's other spaces, with tiers of wooden benches rising in a full ring around the central floor. It was full. Harry had not expected it to be quite this full. The public gallery was packed, which meant the Prophet's coverage of the January hearing had done its work, but he walked to the floor's center without adjusting his pace and stood there while the chamber's clerk formally read the recognition of the Potter sovereignty seat. 200 years of absence, and the seat was being reoccupied by an 11-year-old with a phoenix on his shoulder. He found Augusta Longbottom in her seat and she gave him a short, definitive nod. He found Madame Bones, whose expression was carefully professional and whose eyes were carefully assessing. He found Lucius Malfoy, who was watching him with the measured quality of a chess player in the middle of a game, and he gave Malfoy a brief, neutral acknowledgement that was not quite a nod and not quite not one. He found Dumbledore, who was not in the Wizengamot chamber, the headmaster held no seat here, but who he knew was in the public gallery, because Dumbledore would not miss this. The clerk finished reading. The chamber president, a grey-haired witch named Madame Ogden, said, "The Potter sovereignty seat is recognized. Mr. Potter, do you wish to address the chamber?" Harry looked at her. He looked around the full ring of faces, curious, hostile, cautious, measuring, some openly awed, and he said, "Yes." He spoke for 15 minutes. He had drafted the speech with Hermione's help, which meant it had been argued over extensively, refined into something tight and clear, and then argued over again. It was not a speech about the past, about the theft, about the illegal order, about what had been done. He'd filed all of that with the chamber's record, it was available for anyone who wanted it. He spoke instead about what he intended. The Phoenix Throne's sovereignty, he said, had existed to provide a check on legislative capture, to ensure that no single faction of the Wizengamot could accumulate enough power to permanently shape the law in their own interest. The past century had demonstrated precisely what happened in its absence. He named 3 specific pieces of legislation, the blood purity registration requirements, the creature classification laws, and the Azkaban sentencing guidelines, and he explained, in plain language, why each of them was a product of the power vacuum the throne's removal had created. He wasn't asking the chamber to agree with him today. He was telling them what he'd found, and what he intended to bring forward for review. He spoke clearly, without notes, in the natural register of someone who has been thinking about this for so long that talking about it is just thinking out loud. When he finished, the chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Lucius Malfoy stood up. Harry looked at him. This was faster than he'd expected. He'd thought Malfoy would take a week to organize his approach, consult with his allies, decide on his strategy. The fact that he was moving immediately meant he'd prepared in advance. Which meant he'd known this day was coming and had had his response ready. Respect, Harry thought. And caution. The restored sovereignty claim raises several questions of constitutional standing, Malfoy said, addressing the chamber rather than Harry directly, which was technically correct form and also a choice. Specifically, the question of whether a claim based on a disputed 1926 order can retroactively confer authority over legislation passed in the intervening period. I move that the chamber form a constitutional review committee before any of the Potter claims' practical implications are given formal consideration. It was, Harry acknowledged, intelligent. A committee meant delay. Delay meant that the status quo persisted while things were being reviewed, which was the oldest political move in the world. Harry stood up again before the chamber president could respond. I support the formation of a review committee, he said. Several faces showed surprise. He continued before anyone could recalibrate. With the following conditions, that the committee include at minimum 2 members without existing Wizengamot seats, I suggest a Gringotts legal representative and a representative of the ICW, given that the ICW brief is already in progress. That the committee's findings be presented to the full chamber within 60 days. And that the specific legislation I've named be placed in provisional review status during the committee's work, meaning no new enforcement actions under those specific laws until the committee reports. The chamber president looked between Harry and Malfoy. Mr. Malfoy? Malfoy's jaw was very slightly tighter than usual. The terms were, Harry knew, reasonable enough that opposing them openly would look obstructive rather than principled. Malfoy knew this too. I accept the suggested modifications, he said, in the tone of a man making a concession that doesn't look like a concession. The committee is formed, Madame Ogden said. Membership to be confirmed by Friday. The provisional review status is noted. Harry sat down. Augusta Longbottom, 2 seats away, said nothing. But she was holding her notepad at a very specific angle, and Harry knew her well enough now to read it. She was writing, quickly, in the small decisive hand that meant she was recording something for her own files. In the gallery, he knew, Dumbledore was watching. After the session, in the corridor outside the chamber, Draco Malfoy caught up with Harry. Not with his father, alone, which was a choice in itself. He appeared at Harry's left elbow while Hermione was talking to Augusta and Ron was describing the chamber to Neville in slightly odd terms, and he fell into step with the slightly self-conscious quality of someone doing something they've decided to do before they can talk themselves out of it. Harry glanced at him. "You told my father his seat was safe," Draco said. "Not a question." "Yes. You meant it?" "I don't say things I don't mean," Harry said. "It would be a waste of everyone's time." Draco walked beside him for a few paces in silence. He had the particular quality of someone who has grown up being told that the way things are is the way things should be, and has recently had a structural element of that belief disturbed and is working out what to do about it. "My father isn't going to stop opposing you," he said. "I know. He believes the current structure is correct. Not just because it benefits us. He genuinely believes it." Harry looked at him sideways. "I know that too. It's why I gave him something to protect rather than just threatening him." He paused. "Your father's politics are his own. What you do with yours is different." Draco blinked. Whatever he'd expected from this conversation, that hadn't been it. "Are you trying to recruit me?" "I'm telling you that you have a choice that's separate from his," Harry said. "What you do with it is up to you." He stopped walking and faced him. "You've been watching me since September. I've noticed." "Why?" Draco's jaw moved. He looked, for a moment, stripped of the practiced poise that usually covered him, just a 12-year-old in very expensive robes trying to work out which way to jump. "Because you're not what I expected," he said. "Everyone says that," Harry said. Not unkindly. Something shifted in Draco's face. Not friendship, not yet, not anything that simple. But something honest. "My father says the throne's restoration is a threat to everything we've built," he said. "He says it will destabilize a functioning system." "Your father's version of a functioning system sent an innocent man to Azkaban for 10 years without a trial," Harry said. "I'd like a different kind of functioning." A long pause. "I'll think about it," Draco said. "Take your time," Harry said. Draco walked back toward his father, and Harry watched him go, and thought that 12 was a hard age to figure out who you actually were when the person you'd been built to be was standing right there watching. In the weeks that followed the session, the Quirrell situation sharpened. Harry had been watching it all term, the worsening anxiety, the late-night visits to the third floor, the smell that was getting darker and more specific. After his conversation with Dumbledore back in December, he'd been given a modified version of the full picture. There was a stone, it was being protected, Dumbledore was indeed running a controlled situation to contain what remained of Voldemort. Harry had agreed, provisionally, to let the trap run. But March brought something new. He felt it through the bond first, Fawkes, waking him at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in the second week of March, with the warning note. Sharp, clear, urgent. Not the low uncertain warning but the high specific one that meant now. Harry was out of bed and dressed in under a minute, his wand in his hand and Fawkes on his shoulder. Ron was awake 2 seconds later, because Ron's Weasley instincts for trouble were finely calibrated. "What is it?" "The stone," Harry said. "Someone's going for it tonight." Hermione, somehow, was already in the dormitory doorway. She'd come up from the girls' side, which meant she'd felt something too, or guessed, or both. She had her wand. Her expression said she had about 14 questions and was suppressing all of them for later. "Dumbledore left the school this evening," Harry said, already moving for the door. "I saw his owl go out at dinner. He was called away. Which means someone timed this." "Quirrell," Neville said, from his bed. He was upright, which meant he'd been awake too. "It's Quirrell." Yes, Harry said. He paused at the door. Neville, get a message to McGonagall. Tell her what's happening. What am I telling her is happening? Neville asked. Defense teacher is possessed by the remnant of the most dangerous dark wizard of the last century and is attempting to steal a priceless artifact from a protected floor, Harry said. She'll know what to do. He was moving before he finished the sentence. The third-floor corridor was not, in the end, very difficult. The protections, a three-headed dog, a devil's snare, a chess set, a riddle, were well designed for people who were moderately skilled and highly motivated. Harry and Hermione were considerably more than moderately skilled, and Ron navigated the chess board with the focused intensity of someone playing the most serious game of his life, which it effectively was. The stone chamber was small and lit by a pale blue fire. Quirrell was there, standing before the mirror of Eriste, trying to retrieve the stone from it with the frantic quality of someone who can almost touch what they want but can't quite reach it. He turned when they came in. His eyes had the specific vacancy of someone who is not entirely in charge of their own face. Potter, said a voice that was not Quirrell's, coming from somewhere behind his turban. Low and strange and carrying in it something that made the air in the chamber feel thin. Come to watch. Or interfere. Interfere, Harry said pleasantly. He walked toward the mirror. Fawkes spread his wings and the light he threw was the specific warm gold that had, Harry knew, profound effects on dark magic of this variety, and the thing in Quirrell actually flinched, visibly, from the phoenix fire, which told Harry what he needed to know about the current situation's balance. The stone, the voice from the turban said, belongs to whoever has the power to use it. It belongs to the Potter estate, Harry said. He was standing in front of the mirror now. He looked at his reflection. In the mirror, the reflected Harry was standing calmly, and in his reflected hands was a small red stone, and then the stone was in his pocket, and the real stone was in his real pocket, warm and heavy and present, because Harry had thought about nothing but what he'd do if he retrieved it, and the mirror had given him exactly what Dumbledore designed it to give a person with honest intentions toward it. The silence that followed was total. Give it to me, the voice said. No, Harry said. He felt the presence behind the turban gather itself, 10 years of disembodied malevolent will, reduced to a parasite living on the back of another man's head, still carrying enough power to be seriously dangerous in the right circumstances. He felt it push, with the specific quality of Voldemort's dark magic, which was not subtle but was strong in the way that pure force is strong. It hit him like a wall of cold air. Fawkes sang. The song was not loud. It was the full song, all of it, the grief and the joy and the fire, every phrase that Harry had fallen asleep to for 10 years, and in this chamber it was not simply sound but something that reoriented the air itself, that turned the cold force of the dark magic like a ship turns in water, redirecting it, dispersing it. Quirrell staggered. The presence in him keened, a sound Harry felt more than heard, something between fury and a kind of desperate recognition. That, the voice said, and it was ragged now, shouldn't be possible. Phoenix fire, Harry said. I've had it with me since I was 11 months old. He looked at the turban. At the face beneath it, which was Quirrell's, frightened, now, with Voldemort's control slipping, the man's own consciousness surfacing through the cracks. Mr. Quirrell, Harry said, addressing him directly. I know he's been inside your head all year. I know you couldn't have stopped it once it started. Whatever happens next, that's not your fault. Quirrell's face crumpled. What happened after was fast and not particularly pleasant but also not what a story would make of it, because Fawkes's fire and the Phoenix bond and the stone in Harry's pocket combined into something that the presence in Quirrell could not maintain itself against. Not a battle exactly. More like being in a room where all the oxygen runs out, the presence diminished, struggled, and evacuated, and Quirrell fell, and the cold dissipated, and the chamber smelled of clean air and burning. McGonagall arrived with Sprout and Flitwick 8 minutes later. Harry handed them an unconscious Quirrell, a full account of what had happened, and the stone. He kept the stone in his pocket until Dumbledore got back, and then he handed it over in the headmaster's office with the straightforward air of someone completing a task. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "You could have kept it," he said. "It's going back to Flamel," Harry said. "It's his. And I don't need it." He paused. "I do need to talk to you about the vault classification, when you're ready. The stone is in the estate inventory. If we're voiding the 1926 order, we'll discuss the stone's status fully," Dumbledore said. "I promise you that." "Good," Harry said. He stood. "Also, Sirius is moving into Grimmauld Place. He's asked me to spend the summer there. I'd like your formal approval since I'm technically still a Hogwarts student." "Of course," Dumbledore said. He said it simply, without conditions, and something in the saying of it had the quality of an installment on a debt. "Of course you should be with your godfather, Harry." Harry nodded. He walked toward the door, stopped, looked back. "The committee report is due in 2 weeks," he said. "I'm expecting it to be favorable. When it is, I want to move on the 3 pieces of legislation immediately. I'm going to need the chamber to take it seriously." Dumbledore looked at him. "I will speak to Madame Ogden," he said. "Thank you," Harry said. Then, because it was true and should be said, what you did at the hearing mattered. Sirius's freedom, that was partly you. Dumbledore's expression did something private and complex. "It was the very least I could do." "I know," Harry said. "I'm saying thank you anyway. We can still be honest about what happened in 1926 and I can still mean it." He left. The door closed behind him. In the corridor, Fawkes took off from his shoulder and circled once above his head in the specific high, bright circle that Harry had come to understand as the phoenix's equivalent of a deep breath, a resetting, a marking of something completed. The stone was safe. Sirius was free. The committee would report in 2 weeks. Below him, the castle breathed. Chapter 5, Fire and Shadow. Third year arrived the way significant years tend to, not with announcement but with accumulation, one thing after another building pressure until the world was different and you couldn't quite point to the moment it had changed. Harry spent the summer at Grimmauld Place. The house at number 12 was old and dark and had the accumulated weight of a family that had spent generations making bad choices about power, portraits on the walls that screamed, a mother's portrait that was permanently fixed and permanently furious, rooms that smelled of dark magic the way old wood smells of the fire it once burned in. Sirius had spent the first 2 weeks tearing things off walls and opening windows and airing the whole building out with the focused aggression of someone evicting a previous tenant who has overstayed by about 40 years. Harry helped. They cleared the drawing room first, then the study, then worked their way downward through a house that yielded up its secrets reluctantly and sometimes dangerously, a nest of doxies in the curtains, a boggart in the writing desk, a cabinet full of dark artifacts that Sirius handled with the particular carefulness of a man who knows exactly what each one can do because he grew up with them. They worked together with the easy rhythm of people who have figured out how to occupy the same space, which had taken them about a week and a half of trial and error and one argument about the merits of a particular cursed locket that ended with both of them laughing. The laughter was, Harry thought, the most significant development of the summer. Sirius had arrived at it slowly. The first weeks had been harder, not with Harry specifically, but in general, in the way that a person who has been compressed for 10 years takes time to expand back into their original volume. He'd wake some mornings with the hollow eyes and the controlled stillness that Harry had come to recognize as the residue of whatever he'd been dreaming, and Harry had learned to simply make tea and not ask, because Sirius didn't want pity, he wanted company, and those were different things. But by July he was laughing. Not performing it, actually laughing, the full warm version of it that reached his eyes, that came from somewhere unguarded. Harry stored each instance of it somewhere personal. His father had loved Sirius. His father had chosen to be friends with this man, specifically, and Harry was discovering exactly why. He was also using the summer to work. The review committee had reported in April, as predicted favorable. The 3 pieces of legislation Harry had named, blood purity registration, creature classification, Azkaban sentencing guidelines, had been placed in formal review status. Not overturned yet, because the Wizengamot moved slowly by design, but challenged, officially, on the record. Malfoy had managed to delay the first full chamber vote until autumn by filing a supplementary evidence request, which was legitimate procedure and annoying, and also, Harry had told Hermione when she'd expressed frustration about it, completely fine. He's delaying because he doesn't have the votes to block it outright, Harry had said. Which means the delay is the best he can do. Which means we're winning. Hermione had written this down with the expression of someone collecting data points. Harry spent his mornings at a desk in the study Sirius had cleared for him, going through the second and third trunks of vault documents, the correspondence, which he'd deferred all year in favor of the legal materials, and which turned out to be its own kind of archive. Letters between his father and grandfather. Letters between Fleamont Potter and various Wizengamot members from the 40s and 50s, carefully, persistently, patiently pushing back against the classification of the throne's vault. Letters between his grandmother Euphemia and Gringotts. The whole sustained effort of a family that knew what had been taken and kept records and kept trying, for 50 years, without a public claim because the political climate was never right and there was always something more immediately dangerous to manage. He read all of it. Every letter. It took 6 weeks. By the end he felt, with a clarity that surprised him even though it shouldn't have, that he knew his family. Not perfectly. Not with the completeness of someone who'd grown up with them. But in the way you know people through their written voice, their concerns and their habits and the particular way they turned a phrase when they were angry versus when they were hopeful. His grandfather Fleamont worried about his son and never quite said so directly. His grandmother Euphemia said it very directly and also made apparently legendary roast dinners about which his father had written entire descriptive paragraphs. His father's earliest letters were wildly overconfident in the way of someone at 15 who has not yet been sufficiently humbled, and his later letters were something else, careful and warm and lit from the inside with the specific quality of someone who has found the right people and knows it. One letter, from the September of his parents' 6th year, had his father writing to Fleamont about a girl in his year who had told him, apparently with great specificity, everything that was wrong with his attitude. His father's account of this was simultaneously defensive and deeply impressed. Lily Evans, he'd written, is either going to be my nemesis or the best thing that's ever happened to me. Current evidence supports the latter, but she hasn't agreed to anything yet. Harry had read that letter 3 times and then put it carefully in the box he was keeping for letters that mattered beyond their practical use. In the evenings, he, Sirius, and Remus Lupin sat in the cleared drawing room and talked. Remus had appeared in July, cautious and slightly tentative, at Sirius's invitation. He was worn the way good leather wears, showing his years in the right places, nothing structural lost. He was the third part of the old friendship, the one whose grief had gone inward rather than outward, and the reunion between him and Sirius had been awkward for about an hour and then abruptly and completely itself, two people slotting back into a pattern that had survived a decade of separation. He looked at Harry for the first time with the specific quality of a man confronting a ghost he'd been half expecting and half dreading. "You have your father's worst habit," Remus said, on their third evening, while Harry was mapping Wizengamot voting patterns on the drawing room floor. "Which one?" Harry asked. "Making complicated things look simple so people underestimate the work." Harry thought about that. "He got that from my grandfather," he said. "It's in the letters." Remus looked at him for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor beside the map and started reading the voting patterns. "Greengrass will vote for the creature classification review," he said. "The family keeps Neasels. Sentimental. Goldstein has been wanting to reform the Azkaban guidelines for 3 years but needs cover. If you give him a procedural rationale rather than a political one, he'll vote yes and bring 2 others. Harry looked at him. "How do you know that?" "I was in the order," Remus said simply. "I know how everyone votes and why. Sirius and I have spent the last month going through it." He glanced at Sirius, who was reading in an armchair and pretending not to have been listening. "We have a list." Sirius produced a folded parchment from beside his armchair without looking up from his book. Harry took it and unfolded it. It was 6 pages of voting analysis in 2 different handwritings, Sirius's cramped and Remus's neat. It was better than anything he'd assembled himself. "Why didn't you tell me you'd done this?" Harry asked. "We were going to give it to you on your birthday," Sirius said. "Which is in 2 weeks. You're early." Harry looked at them both, at Sirius in his armchair filling back into himself like a man remembering his own shape, and Remus on the floor beside him who had come here tentatively and was now engaged and alive with the specific electricity of someone who has found purpose again, and felt something that he let himself feel fully, the way Fawkes had taught him to feel things. Clean and complete and warm. "Thank you," he said. Remus inclined his head. Sirius turned a page. 3rd year began with a new defense teacher, Remus, as it turned out, which Harry had not expected and which Dumbledore had arranged with the particular elegant logic that Harry was coming to recognize as the headmaster's better quality. Remus Lupin was exactly the kind of teacher who happened to a student rather than being merely encountered, the kind whose lessons you remembered because he never taught the theory without also making you feel why it mattered. He also taught Harry something in September that the rest of the curriculum had not covered, in a lesson that was technically about patron uses. "The charm requires a specific quality of happy memory," Remus said, in the empty classroom he'd asked Harry to come to after dinner. "But for some people with a phoenix bond, for example, the charm works differently." Harry looked at him. "Differently how?" "The Patronus draws on the caster's deepest source of protective energy," Remus said. He had the quality of a person who has been thinking about how to say this for a while. "For most wizards, that's memory, a stored happiness, retrieved. For you," he looked at Fawkes on the window sill. "The bond is a living source. Not retrieved. Present. Always present." Harry thought about this. "So I don't need a memory." "You might not need anything at all," Remus said. "I want to see what happens." Harry raised his wand. He didn't reach for a memory. He simply opened the channel to the bond, the thing he'd been doing since before he could walk, the deep certain warmth that lived in his chest like a pilot light, and said, "Expecto Patronum." The silver that came from his wand was not a mist. It was not a faint shimmer. It was immediate and solid and enormous, and it was a phoenix, silver white and blazing, spreading wings that filled the classroom and beating them once before settling into a slow luminous hover that turned the room warm. Remus stared at it for a long moment. "Right," he said. "Is that, in 40 years of studying this charm," Remus said quietly, "I have never seen a fully corporeal phoenix Patronus." He looked at Harry. "I've heard of them. Once, in the historical literature. The first Phoenix King's Patronus." The silver phoenix turned its head and looked at Harry. Its eyes were the same deep warm gold as Fawkes's. Fawkes, from the windowsill, spread his wings and sang one phrase, and the silver phoenix sang back, same melody, different register, an exchange that lasted only seconds and left the air in the classroom ringing. Harry let the charm dissolve. The silver faded. The classroom was ordinary again. "Does it work against Dementors?" he asked. "That," Remus said, with the dry warmth that was his particular brand of humor, "is probably the understatement of the century. Voldemort's proposition arrived in October. It came not through Quirrell, who was recovering in St. Mungo's and according to the last report Harry had received, was doing considerably better now that he had exclusive use of his own head, but through the mail. A letter, sealed with no recognizable mark, addressed in a hand that was both precise and somehow wrong, the way something is wrong when it's being produced by a person who is not fully present in their own body. Harry opened it in the Phoenix chamber, alone. "Mr. Potter. I have been watching your proceedings with considerable interest. Your claim on the Phoenix throne is legitimate. I have done my own research, and the legality of the Potter sovereignty is not something I dispute. What I dispute is the assumption that the legitimate heir is necessarily the best person to hold it. My own bloodline is older than you have been told. Slytherin's line, yes, but before that, something older, the same founding magic that authorized the Phoenix Compact. I am not telling you this to threaten. I am telling you this because I believe we could reach an arrangement that serves both our interests. The ministry as currently constituted is a corrupt institution staffed by mediocre people who have spent decades consolidating small powers at the expense of genuine magical advancement. You know this. You have spent 2 years dismantling their arrangements. I propose that instead of restoring an old throne to its old function, we build something new, a joint authority, Phoenix Fire and Parseltongue magic, the founding lines acting in concert rather than opposition. Consider it carefully. I am not asking for an immediate answer. Harry read it twice. Fawkes read it too, in the sense that the phoenix was sitting on his knee and had been watching with his gold eyes while Harry read, and the bond communicated the bird's response clearly, wariness, and underneath it, a deep specific anger that was the oldest anger Fawkes carried, the one that predated Harry, the one that had accumulated over centuries of watching. He folded the letter and sat with it for a while. The offer was not stupid. That was the thing he had to be honest about. It was intelligent, well-constructed, and addressed to the actual Harry rather than to a fantasy of what Voldemort thought the boy who lived should be. Which meant Tom Riddle had done genuine work to understand who Harry was. Which was, frankly, more than most people had done. It was also, underneath the intelligence, underneath the strategic construction, a proposition from a person who had spent 50 years treating other human beings as means rather than ends, who had killed Harry's parents, who had driven Frank and Alice Longbottom to permanent insanity, who had built his entire political project on the premise that some people were worth more than others. The answer was no. It had been no before he'd finished the first paragraph. But no said badly was a wasted opportunity. No said well was the beginning of a different kind of conversation. He wrote back. Dear Tom, thank you for the letter. I've read it carefully. Your analysis of the ministry's corruption is accurate. Your reading of the Phoenix Compact's origins is partially accurate, you're missing the third founding source, which I won't detail here. Your proposed joint authority is not something I'm willing to pursue, for reasons I'll explain, since you've had the courtesy to explain your reasoning and I'll extend you the same. The problem with your proposal isn't its structure. The problem is you. Not your bloodline. Bloodlines are inherited, not chosen, and I've spent 2 years arguing against the idea that inherited blood confers moral worth. The problem is what you've done with yours. The choices you've made. The people you've killed and the people you've broken for reasons that, when I read your history, come down to a terror of insignificance that you've been resolving through destruction since you were a teenager at this school. I'm not interested in sharing authority with someone who uses power as a substitute for the things they're afraid of not having. What I am interested in is this: I know you survived your destruction at Godric's Hollow as a fragment. I know the Horcruxes exist, yes, I know what they are, I found the references in my grandfather's library, and I know you made them. I am not telling you this to threaten you either. I am telling you because I want you to understand that I see the full shape of what you've done, and I still don't think you're inevitable. The Phoenix throne is mine. Britain is not yours. Come at it directly if you feel you must. Harry Potter. He sealed it with the Potter signet. Fawkes looked at him. I know, Harry said. It might provoke him. Fawkes made the sound that meant, and that's fine, Harry said. I'd rather he came at it directly. I can deal with direct. He gave the letter to Fawkes. The Phoenix was gone for 2 days, and came back with no reply, which meant Voldemort had received it and was deciding what to do with it. Harry went to Double Potions and wrote 3 inches on the properties of Bezoar and waited. The confrontation at the edge of the Forbidden Forest happened on a Friday evening in November, which Harry had not planned and which he handled anyway. He'd been there for a legitimate reason. Hagrid's latest magical creature had gotten loose, a juvenile hippogriff named Buckbeak who'd been spooked by something and bolted into the forest's edge, and Harry had better instincts with magical creatures than most people because Fawkes's bond extended a certain warmth that animals responded to. He'd been coaxing Buckbeak back with the calm methodical patience of someone who is not in a hurry, and Fawkes had been doing something with the Phoenix fire that settled the animal's nerves, and Buckbeak was almost back when the temperature dropped. Not the October cold, a different kind of dropping, specific and dark, the quality of air that precedes serious dark magic the way pressure precedes a storm. Harry stood up from his crouch and turned around. Voldemort was not what he'd been. The man standing at the forest's edge, if man was the right word for something that was using a body the way a tenant uses a house they're planning to leave, was tall and thin and pale with the specific pale of something that has been outside of normal life long enough to have lost its coloring. Red eyes. They were genuinely red, which Harry had read about and which was, in person, more striking than any description had suggested. He was wearing what appeared to be conjured robes, simple, dark, functional, no theater, Harry noted. That was either a good sign or a bad one. He had a wand. He was alone. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "You came yourself." "I didn't expect that." "Your letter was direct," Voldemort said. His voice was the one from the back of Quirrell's head, lower now, richer, occupying more of a body that was not yet fully his own. "I appreciate direct. It's rare." "I know," Harry said. Fawkes had landed on his shoulder. The phoenix was not singing. He was simply present, his fire steady and high, and the dark magic that radiated from the figure at the forest's edge was pushing against it the way cold air pushes against warm and doesn't win. "So you've decided on direct." "I've decided on assessment," Voldemort said. He was looking at Harry with the specific quality of someone who is running calculations. Not rage, intelligence. Applied and cold and extremely focused. "You told me you know about the Horcruxes." "Yes." "You told me you don't think I'm inevitable." "I don't." "Why?" Harry thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "Because you're brilliant," he said, "and you've spent all of it on the wrong things. Power as an end rather than a means. Immortality as a substitute for significance. You're not inevitable because you're not actually trying to build anything. You're trying to not be Thomas Riddle." He paused. "And that's an engine that runs out eventually." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when something lands in exactly the right place. Voldemort's red eyes held his. Something moved in them, deep, controlled, and then deliberately suppressed. What it was before the suppression Harry couldn't be entirely certain of, but it had looked, for just a moment, like being seen. "You're not afraid of me," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said simply. "I killed your parents." "I know." His voice was steady because it was true. Not because he'd suppressed anything about it, he'd grieved his parents fully, in the Phoenix Chamber and in his father's letters and in the specific way that loss sits differently when you've come to know someone through their handwriting. He felt it. He'd felt it completely. And it was still true that he was not afraid. "I know everything you did. It doesn't change the fact that you're here and I'm here and neither of us is leaving." Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. The wand in his hand was still, not raised, not threatening, simply present. "You said the throne is yours." "It is. And you won't share authority." "Not with you." "No." "Then we are at an impasse." "We're at a beginning," Harry said. "You know I have the Horcrux information. You know I know what you are and what you've made. You came here yourself, which means you assessed the situation and decided direct engagement was more useful than proxy engagement. Which means," Harry looked at him, "you're not sure I can be removed easily." "And you're right about that." Something flickered in the red eyes. Not amusement exactly. Something adjacent to it, from a mind that found intelligence wherever it appeared and couldn't quite suppress the response. "What do you want from this?" Voldemort asked. "Honestly?" "I want you to stop," Harry said. "I want you to stop the Horcruxes and the followers and the campaign of violence that has been running in the background of my world since before I was born. I want to rebuild a structure of governance that doesn't leave a vacuum people like you fill." He looked at Voldemort directly. "I don't expect you to agree to that tonight. I'm telling you so you understand what I'm building toward. And if I don't stop, Then I'll dismantle it, Harry said. Piece by piece. I already know where 3 of the Horcruxes are. I'm working on the others. The temperature dropped another degree. Voldemort's stillness had the quality of something gathering. You will find, he said, very quietly, that I am harder to dismantle than a Wisengamot committee. Probably, Harry agreed. That's fine. I'm patient. The wand came up. Fawkes sang. It was not the full song this time, it was a single phrase, the opening phrase, the one Harry thought of as the confirmation note, the one that meant yes, I know, I believe you, and it left the wand's ascending motion stalled. Not by magical force. By something older and more specific. The Phoenix song at the frequency it ran in was not an attack on dark magic, it was the absence of the conditions dark magic required, a reorientation of the ambient magic around them the way a fire reorients the air. Voldemort's spell died before it formed. The red eyes went to Fawkes. And what lived in them for that moment was not calculation. It was something rawer than that, something Harry thought, with the particular insight of having spent 12 years carrying an ancient flame in his chest, was close to grief. Old grief. The specific grief of someone who has looked at a thing they couldn't have and chosen destruction over acceptance. Interesting, Voldemort said, very quietly, to the Phoenix. Fawkes looked back at him. He'll remember you, Harry said. He's very old. He may have known you, once, before. I know, Voldemort said. He lowered the wand. Not in defeat. In a kind of deliberate withdrawal, the move of a player who has gathered sufficient information and intends to think about it. This isn't finished, Potter. I know, Harry said. Voldemort turned and walked back into the forest. The darkness absorbed him. The temperature rose. Behind Harry, Buckbeak made a nervous sound and Harry put out one hand and laid it on the hippogriff's flank without turning around, and the animal settled. He stood at the forest's edge for a minute, breathing the cold November air, feeling the bonfire steady and constant in his chest. Then he took Buckbeak back to Hagrid's and went to find his friends. He found them in the common room, Hermione and Ron side by side on the hearth rug, Neville in the armchair that had become his, Augusta's latest letter open on his knee. They looked up when he came in. He must have looked like something, because Hermione stood immediately. What happened, she said. He told them. Quickly, standing in front of the fire still in his coat, because he'd learned that the fastest way through a significant event was to describe it while it was still fresh, before the mind started editing. When he finished, Ron said, he just left. For now. He tried to cast on you, Neville said, not a question. Fawkes stopped it before it formed, Harry said. The Phoenix song at that frequency, I think it disrupts the conditions dark magic needs to operate. It's not a shield exactly. More like the wrong environment. Hermione sat back down, but she wasn't writing. She was looking at the fire with the quality she had when she was working through something large. He knows you know about the Horcruxes, she said. Yes. That changes what he does next. He'll move to protect them. Or he'll accelerate, Neville said. Everyone looked at him. He met their eyes steadily. If he thinks you're going to dismantle them piece by piece, he might decide to move first. Before you're ready. The common room was warm around them. The fire crackled. Outside the tower window, the November grounds were dark and the lake was black and the forest sat at the edge of everything the way forests do, holding its secrets. Neville's right, Harry said. Which means we need to move on the Horcruxes before he can consolidate. He looked at them, at Hermione, who was already thinking it through, at Ron, who had the set expression of someone who's afraid and going anyway, at Neville, who had said the true hard thing without flinching. I know where 3 are. The diary, that's been destroyed, actually, I found the documentation in the vault records that it was recovered and incinerated by Aurors in 1985 thinking it was a dark artifact without understanding what it was. Good. The ring, it's at the Gaunt Shack. The locket, It's in Grimmauld Place. I've been looking at it all summer. The silence that followed this was the kind that comes when a plan becomes real. The locket, Ron said slowly. You mean the one Sirius and Remus couldn't get off the cabinet? Yes. But Fawkes can handle it. We'll need to be careful. Destroying a Horcrux isn't straightforward, it has to be done with something that causes irreparable damage at a magical level. Basilisk venom. Fiend fire. Phoenix fire. He paused. Phoenix fire, specifically, in this context. Hermione looked at Fawkes, who had come to rest on the back of Harry's chair and was sitting with the particular stillness that meant he was listening to every word. He'd do it, she said. Not a question. He offered, Harry said. Last summer. I said not yet. He looked at the phoenix. I think it's yet. Fawkes made the confirmation note. Brief and clear and completely certain. Okay, Ron said, with the tone of someone who has made their decision and wants to move on to logistics. When? Christmas, Harry said. We'll be at Grimmauld Place. I'll have Sirius and Remus there. We do it properly, no rushing, no half measures. He paused. I also need to tell Dumbledore. Three faces showed the same slight surprise. He knows about the Horcruxes, Harry said. He told me in October, after the forest meeting, actually, he came to me with information about them that he's been sitting on since the 50s. He's been trying to figure out how to deal with them without the tools to do it. He paused. He needs to know we have the tools now. You trust him with this? Hermione asked. Precisely, without the edge of a criticism. Just the accurate question. Harry thought about it. I trust him with this specific thing, he said. He didn't protect my family the way he should have. He co-signed the theft of the throne. He spent 12 years managing me from a distance instead of helping me understand what I was. He held each of their eyes in turn. But he's not trying to hurt me. And he has information I need. I can work with that. The fire burned. Fawkes's tail feathers caught the light and turned it gold. There's something else, Harry said. Dumbledore wants to tell me something. He's been working up to it all term. He said he'd be ready by December. He looked at the window, where the November dark was complete and heavy. I think it's about the night my parents died. About what exactly happened and why. About the prophecy. Prophecy? Ron said. There was one, Harry said. I know that much, found the reference in the Order's internal documents. Something that Voldemort acted on. Something Dumbledore has been keeping to himself since before I was born. He looked at his hands, at the signet ring, the phoenix crest catching the firelight, the same phoenix that was in the vault and in the chamber and in the mosaic. Whatever it says, I want to hear it. Not because it'll change anything I'm doing. Because I deserve to know. Nobody argued with that. Hermione reached out and put her hand over his on the armrest, briefly. Not speaking. Just present. Ron's foot nudged his from the other side in a specific Weasley expression of solidarity that didn't use words because the words weren't necessary. Neville closed Augusta's letter and folded it away. Outside, the November wind came off the mountains and hit the castle, and the castle stood, as it had always stood, holding its people. Dumbledore called him to the office on a grey Tuesday in December, 3 days before the end of term. The office was warm. The instruments turning. The empty perch. Dumbledore sat behind his desk with his hands folded, and on the desk between them was a stone basin of shallow water that swirled with something silver and luminous. Sit down, Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry sat. He looked at the basin. What you're looking at, Dumbledore said, is a pensieve. It holds memories. This specific memory is one I have been carrying for 16 years, and which belongs, in every meaningful sense, to you more than to me. He paused. Before I show it to you, I want to say something. Harry waited. I have spent a long time, Dumbledore said, believing that I could protect people best by managing what they knew. By making decisions on their behalf that I judged to be in their best interest, without asking whether they wished to participate in those decisions. He was looking at Harry with the full directness of a man who has prepared himself for a difficult thing and is doing it. I made that decision about your family in 1926. I made it again in 1981. I have been making it, in various forms, about you for the past 2 years. He paused. I was wrong. Not about every individual choice, perhaps, but about the underlying approach. A person cannot be protected by being kept ignorant of their own life. The office was very quiet. I'm not ready to tell you everything yet, Dumbledore said. Not because I'm still choosing to withhold it, but because there are things I am still working to understand myself, and I would rather be honest about my uncertainty than give you a confident account of something I'm not yet confident about. He looked at the pensive. But this, the prophecy, and what happened the night your parents died, this you should have had years ago. I am sorry you're hearing it at 13. Harry looked at the pensive. Then back at Dumbledore. Tell me. Dumbledore told him. The prophecy first, he recited it from memory, quietly, with the care of someone reciting something that has defined the shape of a decade and a half of decisions. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. Then the rest. The night of the betrayal, what Dumbledore had known and when, the sacrificial magic in Lily's death, what the rebounding curse had done, what the scar carried, and Harry sat through all of it with the steady attentiveness of someone who is hearing things that are large and that need to be held carefully. When Dumbledore finished, the room was quiet for a long time. The scar is a Horcrux, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. Another silence. You've known this for a while, Harry said. I have suspected it since 1981 and known it with certainty since last year, Dumbledore said. And I have been trying to determine whether it can be removed without cost to you, before telling you. He paused. I have not yet found a definitive answer. Harry sat with this. He sat with it the way he sat with all the hard things, openly, letting it be what it was. A fragment of Voldemort's soul in his scar. Residing there since the night of the bonding. Living alongside Fawkes's fire for 13 years. He looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back at him. The bond communicated something that was not a surprise, that was the quality of something known and held in reserve, something the Phoenix had been carrying with patience, waiting for the right moment. Yes. I know. I have always known. And then, underneath it, and I have been here. I have always been here. That is not nothing. That is not nothing at all. The Phoenix fire, Harry said. It's been keeping it contained. Keeping it separate from me. Dumbledore's eyes widened very slightly. I had theorized as much, he said carefully. Fawkes knew, Harry said. Since the night of the bonding. He looked at the Phoenix, who was watching him with the gold eyes that had watched him for 13 years. You bonded to me knowing what was in my scar. Fawkes sang one note. The confirmation note. Yes. And I chose you anyway. Harry looked at the ceiling of the office for a moment. Breathed. Came back. Okay, he said. He looked at Dumbledore. Then here's what we need to do. Dumbledore blinked. I'm not going to fall apart about it, Harry said. Not cold. Warm, actually, the warmth of someone whose fire has not gone out despite everything being thrown at it. It's a problem with a solution. The fire has been containing it for 13 years. We find a way to remove it that the fire supports. He paused. And then we find the other Horcruxes and we end this. He looked at Dumbledore. I'm going to need your full information on the remaining Horcruxes. Everything you know. No filtering, no management, no deciding what I can handle. Dumbledore looked at him. The complicated thing that lived in the old man's expression had shifted again, moving, Harry thought, from the weight of decisions carried alone towards something that was not quite relief but was its precondition. The beginning of setting something down. Yes, Dumbledore said. Simply and completely. Yes, Harry. Everything. Fawkes sang, soft and warm, and the pensive on the desk swirled silver in the firelight, and outside the Hogwarts window the December snow was beginning, falling clean and unhurried and covering the grounds in white. Harry sat in the headmaster's office at 13 years old, carrying a fragment of the darkest wizard of the century in his scar and a phoenix bond in his chest and a stolen throne in the legal process of being returned, and he was not afraid. Not of the scar. Not of the prophecy. Not of what still needed doing. Fawkes had been here since the beginning, and fire, Harry knew, was how things ended. But fire was also how they began. He had work to do. Chapter 6, The Throne Restored. The winter holidays at Grimmauld Place had a different quality than the summer ones. The house was warmer now, literally and otherwise. Sirius had finished the room-by-room clearing by October, and what remained was something that resembled a home rather than a museum of bad decisions. The drawing room had proper furniture. The kitchen smelled of whatever Remus had been cooking, which was always good in a quiet, competent way that reflected his general approach to everything. The portraits that remained were the ones Sirius had decided were worth keeping, which was 3 of them, including a small oil painting of a young Sirius and James at what appeared to be a Hogwarts Quidditch celebration, both of them laughing so hard they were leaning on each other, and which Sirius had hung in the kitchen where he'd see it every morning. Harry had looked at that portrait for a long time on the first night of the holidays. The whole group was there. Ron and Hermione had been invited by their respective families and had respectively convinced their respective families, and Neville had come with Augusta's brisk approval and a hamper of food from Longbottom Manor that had fed all of them for 3 days. Augusta herself came for Christmas Day, sat at the head of the table with her vulture hat and her formidable opinions, and argued with Sirius about ministry politics for 4 hours in a way that was clearly enjoyable for both of them. It was, Harry thought, the first Christmas he'd had that felt like the word was supposed to mean something. He let himself have it. 3 days of simply being present, eating and talking and playing chess with Ron, who was getting better and had beaten him twice this week, and sitting in the kitchen late at night while Remus read and the fire burned and Fawkes moved between them all like a warm current. 3 days before the work. On the 28th of December, they dealt with the locket. It was in the cabinet in the first-floor drawing-room, the one Sirius and Remus had spent 3 days trying to open in August without success, the one that Harry had looked at all summer with the patient attention of someone who knows what a thing is and is waiting until they understand it fully before touching it. He understood it now. Dumbledore had given him everything in December, every piece of research, every theory, every note accumulated over 30 years of studying Tom Riddle's work. The Horcrux in the locket was the 4th one made, the one created after the killing of Hepzibah Smith, and it was the most purely malevolent of the 3 remaining because it had had the longest uninterrupted time to develop its own consciousness. Destroying it required something that could cause genuine magical destruction at a soul fragment level. Phoenix fire, at the right frequency and intensity, could do it. The question was delivery, getting the fire into direct contact with the soul fragment without triggering the Horcrux's defensive response, which in this case was considerable and would, Dumbledore had warned, involve a direct attack on whoever was closest. It will show you things, Dumbledore had said. The worst things it can find in you. Things about your parents, your future, your friends. It will try to unmake your will to act. Good luck with that, Sirius had said, from his chair. Dumbledore had looked at him. Sirius, I'm serious, so am I, Sirius said, meeting the old man's eyes with the level quality he'd developed over the past year, the one that had no residual deference in it. Whatever it shows Harry, Harry will deal with it. That's been the shape of things since he was 11 months old. Dumbledore had looked between them, godfather and godson, the specific quality of their ease together, the thing that had grown over a year and a half of evenings in this house, and had not pressed the point. Now they stood in the drawing room, all of them, Harry, Sirius, Remus, Hermione, Ron, Neville, and the cabinet was open and the locket sat on the cleared table in the center of the room on a plain cloth, and it was already doing something to the air around it. A heaviness. A slight drop in temperature that was not the December cold outside. Fawkes landed on the table 6 inches from the locket. The locket reacted. Not visibly, not with fire or magic, but in the bond. Harry felt it push, a wave of darkness directed specifically at the phoenix fire, testing it the way a predator tests a fence. Fawkes sat still and let it test him, and then he turned his gold eyes to Harry and sang the opening phrase. "Ready." "Okay," Harry said. He looked at the locket. Not at the soul fragment with the clarity of something fully understood. This was a piece of a person who had made choices, bad ones, catastrophic ones, but choices that had come from somewhere before the choices. A child in an orphanage. A boy who had been brilliant and afraid and had resolved his fear the worst possible way. "I know what you are," he said to the locket, quietly. "And I know who made you. This doesn't end anything important. He'll still be there when this is done. But you don't get to stay." The locket's S-clasp moved. The thing inside it pushed. It showed him James Potter's face. Not dead, alive, looking at him, and saying something in a voice that the soul fragment had constructed from somewhere, thin and wrong, saying, "You're doing this wrong, you're not ready, you were never supposed to be the one to." "That's not him," Harry said. His voice was steady. "I know his voice. I've read 300 of his letters. That's not him." The image shifted. His mother. Then Sirius. Then Hermione, her face in a state of fear she'd never shown, saying something about how it was too much and they were all going to, "Still no," Harry said. Fawkes sang. And the full song this time, all of it, and the locket blazed gold, and Harry picked it up with his bare hand, which he'd been advised against, which he'd decided to do anyway because the protective fire in his palm made it possible, and held it while Fawkes set it alight with the specific frequency of phoenix fire that was not the ordinary warmth but the deep old burning, the first fire, the one that was the condition of everything. The locket screamed. It was a sound that had no physical source and left marks on the air, the sound of something that has existed through human suffering being unmade, and every person in the room felt it differently. Ron went pale, Hermione's jaw tightened, Neville closed his eyes briefly, Sirius and Remus both took a step forward before stopping themselves. Then it was done. The locket in Harry's palm was ordinary metal, split open, empty and cold. He set it down on the cloth. His hand was unburned. The room exhaled. "That's 1, Ron said, into the quiet. 2 if you count the diary," Hermione said, and her voice was only slightly uneven. "Which was already destroyed." "The ring next," Harry said. "After Christmas." They went to the Gaunt shack on the 30th. Just Harry and Dumbledore, because this one Dumbledore had wanted to approach himself. He'd been carrying the knowledge of it the longest. He'd found the shack in the 50s while researching Riddle's history, had documented it, had come back 3 times over the decades and found the ring still there with its curse intact and the soul fragment within it, and had not destroyed it because he hadn't had the means. He had the means now. The shack was in Little Hangleton, a miserable decaying thing at the edge of a village that had collectively agreed to ignore it for 50 years. The interior smelled of damp and old magic, dark and specific. The ring was on the floor under a rotting floorboard, exactly where Dumbledore had documented it. Harry let Fawkes handle it. Dumbledore watched the phoenix work, the precise application of the deep fire to the ring stone, the Marvolo family crest taking the heat and then shattering, with an expression that Harry had come to read accurately. The old man was not performing composure. He was genuinely moved, in the way of someone seeing a resolution to something that has followed him for the better part of 50 years. 2 more after this, Harry said, when it was done. The cup and the snake. Nagini will be the hardest, Dumbledore said. She's with him directly. I know. Harry looked at the ruined ring on the shack floor. The cup is at Gringotts. In the Lestrange vault. He paused. Ripclaw has been cooperative. I think if I explain the situation formally, with the documentation we have, Gringotts will allow access under the estate's legal standing. Dumbledore looked at him. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since October, Harry said. When you told me about the Horcruxes. The cup's presence in the Lestrange vault is interesting. The Lestranges are in Azkaban, their vault has no active legal representative, and the cup is a stolen artifact in any case. Gringotts doesn't protect stolen property indefinitely. They have their own ethics about that. He picked up the ruined ring and turned it in his fingers. The crack through the stone was clean. The Peveril crest, he said. I've read about the Deathly Hallows. Dumbledore went very still. The stone is destroyed, Harry said. Good. I don't want it. He set the ring down. The wand, I know where it is. I'm not going to pursue it. He looked at Dumbledore directly. The cloak is mine. My father's. It's in his vault and I'd like it back. A long pause. Yes, Dumbledore said. Of course. They walked out of the gaunt shack into the December cold, and the village of Little Hangleton sat grey and small around them, and somewhere above the overcast sky, invisible, the world was continuing its business. You're not angry at me, Dumbledore said, as they reached the apparition point. He said it not as a statement but as something he was trying to understand. Harry thought about it. I'm working on it, he said honestly. There are days I'm angry. Not at what you believed, your reasons weren't absurd, even if the outcomes were. At the choices. At the fact that I grew up not knowing my family, not knowing the throne, not knowing Sirius was innocent, because you made decisions on behalf of people who deserved to make them themselves. He paused. But anger isn't useful as a permanent state. I've decided to be angry about it in doses, as needed, and then get on with things. Dumbledore was quiet. I also know, Harry said, that you've spent the last year actually changing. Not performing change. Actually doing it. That matters. He looked at the old man with the steady directness that had defined every conversation they'd had. I'm not forgiving you yet. I'll tell you when I am. That is, Dumbledore said, very quietly, more than I deserve. Probably, Harry agreed. But I'm not in the business of giving people what they deserve. I'm in the business of building something that works. He turned to the apparition point. The Wisengamot vote on the legislation is in February. I'm going to need you in that chamber. I'll be there, Dumbledore said. January was a siege of paperwork and lobbying that Harry and Hermione ran from Grimmauld Place and then from Hogwarts, because term started and they had actual school to attend as well, and Harry had decided when he was 10 that the way to handle competing priorities was to be extremely well organized and sleep slightly less than was strictly advisable. Ripclaw agreed to the cup retrieval without requiring a formal hearing. The Lestrange vault had been in legal limbo since the sentencing, and the Goblin Bank's own records indicated the cup was a stolen artifact whose provenance traced to the Hufflepuff line, which was, Ripclaw noted, connected to the Phoenix Compact in ways that made the Potter estate's interest in its recovery a matter of established Goblin treaty law. They recovered the cup in the third week of January. Harry, Hermione, Ripclaw, and a Gringotts cursebreaker named William Weasley who was, Ron had mentioned with visible pride, his eldest brother. Bill Weasley was tall and dragonfang earringed and looked at Harry with the assessing quality of someone who has dealt with Egyptian curses for 3 years and finds a 13-year-old with a phoenix bond professionally interesting. He handled the curse breaking on the vault's secondary wards with the relaxed precision of very good craftsmanship, and when the cup was retrieved and Fawkes destroyed the soul fragment inside it with the same focused fire he'd used on the locket, Bill watched the process with his arms crossed and said, "That's the most efficient dark artifact neutralization I've ever seen." "The Phoenix fire works at the right frequency," Harry said. "I know. I've read the theory. I've never seen it applied." He looked at Fawkes. "Extraordinary animal." "He's not an animal exactly," Harry said. "No," Bill agreed. "He's not, is he? 3 Horcruxes gone. The diary, the locket, the cup. The ring. 4. Nagini was the last object. And Harry had an idea about Nagini that he hadn't told anyone yet because he hadn't fully worked it out, but it was taking shape. The February Wisengamot session was on the 14th. Harry had spent 6 weeks lobbying, calling in the analysis from Sirius and Remus's list, meeting with members one by one or in small groups, making his case, not emotionally, but practically, with the documentation and the clean logic of someone who has done the work. He'd met with Goldstein and given him the procedural rationale that Remus had identified. He'd met with the Greengrass family matriarch and talked about the creature classification laws in terms of their practical application to Kneazle breeding. He'd met with a dozen others and found, more often than not, that people who had been sitting on opinions they couldn't express publicly were relieved to have someone ask them directly. He'd met with Draco Malfoy, twice, in the Hogwarts library. Not to ask him for anything, Draco held no seat, but because Draco was Lucius's son and a conversation with Draco was a channel to Lucius, and because Harry had been watching Draco all year and had concluded that the boy was, underneath the Malfoy performance, genuinely conflicted in a way that deserved to be taken seriously. Their second meeting, a week before the vote, had lasted 2 hours. Draco had told him, in careful phrases that were all technically deniable, that his father had the votes to block the creature classification reform but not the blood purity registration, and that if Harry was willing to sequence the votes, blood purity first, creature classification second, Lucius might allow the first to pass without a full fight because the second was the one he cared about personally. Harry had looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Draco looked out the library window. "Because I've been thinking about what you said. About choices." He paused. "And because the blood purity registration law, my father uses it against people he doesn't like. I've seen how it works." He looked back at Harry. "I don't want to be the kind of person who says nothing about that." Harry had nodded. He'd gone back to his documents. "Thank you," he said. Draco had left without acknowledging the thanks, which was probably the most Malfoy response available, but he'd also not recanted anything, which was what mattered. Harry sequenced the votes as Draco had suggested. Blood purity registration reform passed 17-8. 3 of Malfoy's usual allies had abstained rather than voted against, which was Draco's information in action. The result wasn't celebrated in the chamber, it was formal procedure, recorded and tabled and moved on from, but Augusta Longbottom caught Harry's eye across the chamber floor and gave him the definitive nod that meant she was satisfied, and Madame Bones wrote something in her record with the quality of a person who has been waiting to write it for a long time. Creature classification reform came the following week, after the mandatory procedural gap. This one was harder. Lucius fought it properly, raised 3 procedural objections that were technically legitimate, brought in 2 allies Harry hadn't fully anticipated. It passed by 1 vote, and the 1 vote was Draco's father. Not in support. Lucius Malfoy had abstained. He didn't look at Harry when he did it. He looked straight ahead with the controlled expression that was his default in public, and he abstained, and the vote carried. Harry didn't make anything of it in the chamber. He recorded it internally as self-interest, correctly applied. He's protecting his family's standing in the new structure. File and monitor. But he thought, driving back to Hogwarts in the ministry transport that Augusta had arranged, that somewhere in the sequence of events that had started in a Gringotts vault and moved through courtrooms and chambers and a forest's edge and a shack in Little Hangleton, something had shifted in Lucius Malfoy's calculations, something about what the world was going to look like in 5 years and who it was going to be worth being aligned with. Harry would take it. It wasn't redemption and it wasn't friendship and he wasn't pretending otherwise. But it was a man choosing not to make things worse. That was something. Nagini happened in March. Voldemort had been quiet since November, the forest meeting had bought time, Harry thought, the specific time of a person who has reassessed and is repositioning. But the Horcrux's destruction had been felt. He was sure of that. 4 of 7 gone, the soul's architecture damaged, the immortality project unraveling piece by piece. That was the kind of thing a person felt. The message came through channels Harry had not expected, a house elf, appearing in the Gryffindor common room on a Tuesday morning, holding a rolled parchment with the same wrong handwriting as the October letter, and depositing it on the table in front of Harry with the expression of a creature who has been given an instruction and is following it without being particularly happy about it. Come to the Chamber of Secrets tonight. Alone. I have a proposition more specific than the last one. Bring the phoenix. This is not a trap. I am aware you'd survive a trap. This is a conversation. Harry showed it to Hermione. She read it twice. He wants to negotiate. He wants to offer me something, Harry said. Or ask me for something. There's a difference. He thought about it. He's losing the Horcrux war. Foregone. He knows I know about Nagini. He knows the snake is the last one, that if it's destroyed his immortality is gone entirely. He paused. He's renegotiating terms. Or he's luring you somewhere to end it, Ron said. He said bring the phoenix, Neville said. Everyone looked at him. He knows Fawkes can kill him if it comes to a fight. He's not setting up a fight he thinks he'll lose. He's setting up a conversation. Harry looked at Neville. Exactly. He went alone. Or as alone as he ever was, Fawkes on his shoulder, the bond steady in his chest, his wand in his hand. He told the others where he was going and what to do if he wasn't back by midnight, wake Dumbledore. The instruction was not precautionary in the sense of expecting the worst, it was simply what you did when you went to talk to the most dangerous dark wizard of the century under a school. The Chamber of Secrets was cold and old and had the quality of a space that had been designed to impress, the serpentine pillars, the vast ceiling, the basilisk skeleton still lying where it had fallen 2 years ago, enormous and pale as old bone. Harry walked its length without hurrying and found Voldemort standing at the chamber's far end near the statue of Salazar Slytherin with Nagini coiled around his shoulders. The snake regarded Harry with intelligent yellow eyes. Harry looked at her, really looked, with the specific attention he gave to things that mattered, and felt, through the bond, Fawkes's response to what was inside her. Not the same response as the locket or the cup. More complicated. Sadder, in a way. Because Nagini was alive. The soul fragment inside her had not displaced her entirely, she was still herself, still a living creature, and the piece of Voldemort in her was wound through her like a vine through a tree. Destroying it without destroying her was possible, but it required precision. You could parseltongue to her, Voldemort said. It was an observation, not a question. Yes, Harry said. He knew enough of the language from the Phoenix Bond's ancient memory, not fluent, not Riddle's native fluency, but enough. Fawkes remembered the founding magic that had touched all the original lines, and parseltongue at its root was not so different from Phoenix speech. Both were languages of intent older than words. She trusts you already, Voldemort said. I can feel it. She shouldn't, she's never met you, but the Phoenix fire reads as friendly to her. Something moved in the red eyes. Interesting. What do you want? Harry asked. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. The chamber was very quiet. I want to make a trade, he said. Nagini, for the Horcrux information. Harry frowned. What information? I've been destroying them. You haven't told me how, Voldemort said. How the Phoenix fire works at that specific frequency. The mechanism. He paused. I want to understand what I've been building against. I want to know what I've never been able to counter. Harry looked at him. You want to understand Phoenix fire. I want to understand why it works on what I've made and nothing else does. The red eyes held his steadily. I am not offering peace. I am not offering cessation. I'm offering Nagini. She won't resist, I'll command it. The soul fragment is mine to give or withdraw from, at this stage. I can withdraw it. Your Phoenix can take what remains. He paused. In exchange for the explanation. Harry thought about this. It was the strangest conversation he'd ever had, which was saying something. He looked at Nagini. The snake looked back at him, her tongue tasting the air, and in Parseltongue, rough, careful, the words carrying more intention than precision, he said, "Are you afraid?" The snake was still for a moment. Then, "The fire is warm." "I know." He looked at Voldemort. "Why does it matter?" "Understanding how it works." "Because I've spent 50 years afraid of exactly one thing," Voldemort said, and his voice was flat and exact and entirely without performance. "Not death. I've solved death, or I thought I had. Not you specifically, I've solved you, or I thought I had. The one thing I have never been able to account for, never been able to replicate or counter or categorize, is that." He indicated Fawkes with a slight motion of his head. "The fire. The bond. Whatever your family had that mine didn't." The red eyes didn't waver. "I want to understand it before it kills me." The silence stretched. Harry understood what Voldemort was actually asking, and it was not the question about mechanism. The question about mechanism was the surface. What he was actually asking was, what do you have that I don't, and can I get it, and if not, why not? The question underneath a lifetime of choices that had come from a child who had looked at the world and concluded that the only way to be safe was to be unreachable. He thought about how to answer it honestly. "The fire isn't a technique," Harry said. "It's not something I did or learned. It's a relationship." He looked at Fawkes, who was watching the exchange with the attentiveness of someone who has waited a very long time for this specific moment. "Fawkes bonded to my family because of who my family was, not their power, not their bloodline in the genetic sense. The quality of what they chose to be. Every generation that kept the covenant with the Phoenix kept it by choosing to be accountable, to use authority as service rather than as extraction." He looked back at Voldemort. "That's not something you can take. It's something you have to build. And you can't build it with Horcruxes in the world, because the Horcruxes are the proof of exactly the opposite choice." A very long silence. Voldemort looked at Fawkes. The Phoenix looked back at him, and this time, this specific moment, Fawkes sang. Not the full song, not the warning note. Something Harry had never heard from him before, a single phrase of extraordinary sadness, the phrase that lived in the song between the loss and the renewal, the part that was neither grief nor joy but the space in between them where things could have gone differently. The red eyes closed. Just briefly. Something in the chamber's air shifted. "Withdraw the fragment," Harry said quietly. "From Nagini. Now." Voldemort opened his eyes. He looked at Harry for another moment. Then he said, to Nagini, in Parseltongue, "Come here," and the snake uncoiled and moved across the chamber floor to Harry's feet, and Voldemort did something that Harry felt through the bond as a release, a giving up of held tension, and the thing inside Nagini diminished. Not gone. Not fully. But weakened enough. Fawkes flew from Harry's shoulder and landed on the stone floor beside the snake, and Nagini lifted her head and regarded the phoenix and made no aggressive move, and Fawkes bent his head and touched her with his fire carefully, precisely, at the specific frequency, and a piece of Voldemort's soul that remained in her burned out clean. Nagini coiled and was still, alive and whole and entirely herself. Harry looked at Voldemort. "That's all 7. Voldemort stood in his chamber among the basilisk bones and the serpentine pillars, and he was mortal, and he knew it, and his expression carried something that was not surrender and was not peace but was the particular quality of a person who has had one thing taken away that they've been using to avoid looking at everything else. "Now what?" Voldemort said. "Now," Harry said, "you have a choice. The same choice everyone has. Who you want to be with what's left." He paused. "I can't make it for you. I wouldn't if I could." He looked at the man, at Tom Riddle, 50 years of terrible choices deep, standing in a chamber he built as a teenager out of the same hunger for significance that had been driving him ever since. "You're brilliant," Harry said. "You always were. I've read your Hogwarts records, they're in my grandfather's files, you'd be horrified. You could have built something worth having. Sentiment, Voldemort said. Accuracy, Harry said. There's a difference. He turned to leave. Nagini stays here. I'm not taking her, she's her own creature. Fawkes will know if the soul piece reforms. He looked back once. Think about what I said. I'm not expecting it to change anything. But I want you to have heard it. He walked out of the Chamber of Secrets and back up through the school, Fawkes on his shoulder singing the renewal phrase, the one that came after the grief and before the joy, the part of the song that was the turning, and the castle's enchantments moved around him like a tide. The Wizengamot session of May the 1st was the fullest the chamber had been in 20 years. Harry knew this because Augusta Longbottom had told him, with the precision of someone who had attended all of them. Every seat was occupied. The public gallery was standing room. The Prophet had run 3 pieces in the preceding week about the session's agenda, which had been filed formally in advance as, formal recognition of the Phoenix sovereignty, motion to restore and seat the Phoenix throne in its constitutional function. Harry walked in with Fawkes on his shoulder and his father's signet ring on his hand and the full documentation of the Potter sovereignty claim in Hermione's bag, which she was carrying because she'd argued, successfully, that organizational custody should rest with the person who had indexed everything. He walked in without looking at the gallery. He'd learned that looking at the gallery before you'd done what you came to do was a form of putting outcome before action, which he found generally unhelpful. He walked to the floor's center and stood. Madame Ogden opened the session. The recognition motion was moved by Augusta Longbottom, seconded by Madame Bones, and supported by written briefs from Gringotts, the ICW, and 6 independent magical law experts. Harry had read all of them. They were thorough and favorable. Lucius Malfoy raised 2 procedural objections. Both were technically valid and both were answered by Hermione's documentation, which Harry presented with the precision of someone who had spent 2 months preparing for exactly those 2 objections and had his answers ready in under a minute each time. Malfoy sat back. His expression was entirely controlled. Harry caught his eye briefly, the gray, calculating eyes of a man who has assessed the outcome and made his calculation, and Malfoy looked away first. The vote was called. 22-4. 4 against. 7 abstentions, which included Lucius Malfoy, which was, Harry thought, the most significant abstention in recent Wizengamot history. The motion carried. The chamber president said, formally, the Phoenix sovereignty is recognized. The Potter seat is restored to its full constitutional authority. The Phoenix throne will be installed in this chamber at the earliest practical opportunity. The room erupted. Not uniformly. There were unhappy faces in the tiers, controlled displeasure, political calculation already spinning forward into next session's implications. But the room erupted, and in the gallery Harry heard, distinctly above the general noise, a sound that was specifically Ron Weasley making no attempt whatsoever to be composed. Fawkes spread his wings above Harry's head and sang. Not a phrase this time. Not the opening bars. The full song, all of it, every movement. And in the domed chamber of the Wizengamot it rang off the stone walls and the wooden benches and the enchanted ceiling, and it was, Harry thought, the oldest sound in this building, older than any of the current members, older than most of their family lines, the sound of something restored that should never have been taken. He stood still and let it fill the room. Augusta Longbottom, in her seat, was perfectly upright and perfectly composed. Her eyes were bright. Dumbledore, in the gallery, Harry looked up once, finally, when the song was ending, was standing with his hands folded and his face open in a way Harry had never seen it, stripped of the elegant management, looking at the floor of the chamber with an expression that was not pride exactly but was the acknowledgement of a debt partially paid. He met Harry's eyes. He inclined his head. Harry looked back at the chamber floor. The Phoenix throne came out of the Gringotts vault on the 15th of May. They brought it through the ministry's main atrium, which Harry had arranged deliberately, not for spectacle, but because it mattered that the journey of it was visible. That it passed through the spaces it had been absent from. 6 Gringotts representatives carried it on a platform of spelled wood, and the ministry personnel in the atrium stopped what they were doing, and the flood traffic halted, and people stood and watched a dark carved throne with phoenix wings on its back move through the most public space in British magical governance and into the Wisengamot chamber where it had always belonged. It was installed on a raised platform at the floor's front, facing the tiers. Harry sat in it for the first time that afternoon. He'd been waiting for a moment that was earned and witnessed and chosen, and this was it, the Wisengamot chamber, with Sirius and Remus in the gallery and Hermione and Ron and Neville on the floor behind him and Augusta Longbottom standing by her seat and Dumbledore at the gallery's edge, and Harry walked to the throne and sat down and the bonfire in his chest blazed up to meet the throne's warmth the way two flames from the same source touch, exactly as they had in the vault, except this time there was no restraint in it. The throne's enchantments activated. The chamber's existing wards, dormant for a century, resonated. The phoenix fire lattice at the building's foundations, which Fawkes had shown him in impressions years ago, came back online in a wave of warmth that every magical person in the building felt, most of them without knowing what it was, a sudden ambient rightness, a quality of the air becoming what it had always been before something was taken out of it. Fawkes flew from the chamber's entrance. He'd been outside, Harry realized, waiting for exactly this, and came in through the high windows and landed on the throne's carved back, between the wings, and sat, and sang. The song filled the chamber and the building and, Harry thought, probably a fair bit of the street above it, rising through stone and enchantment into the May afternoon. Harry sat in the phoenix throne and felt the weight of it, not uncomfortable, not oppressive. Real. The weight of something that was simply true settling into its correct position. He looked out at the chamber, at the tiers of seats, some occupied, some empty, at the gallery with his people in it, at the walls that had heard centuries of arguments and decisions and political maneuvering, and he thought about what he'd said to Voldemort in the Chamber of Secrets about authority as service rather than extraction. He thought about his father's letters and his mother's bargaining voice and a sealed vault that had been waiting and a phoenix that had sat watch over a damaged crib on a Halloween night and had been there every night since. He thought about Sirius on the atrium floor, thin and clear-eyed and beginning to remember how to take up space. About Neville sitting straighter in rooms where he'd been overlooked. About Ron showing up because Harry had been gone too long. About Hermione reading a book on a train and asking about legal mechanisms before she'd known him 4 hours. He thought about Draco Malfoy abstaining. He thought about Dumbledore inclining his head. He thought about a conversation in a dark chamber with a man who had been brilliant and afraid and had chosen the wrong answers to both and who had looked at Fawkes and heard the sad phrase and had closed his eyes for a second. He didn't know what happened next with Voldemort. He had his suspicions. The mortal man was still out there, still dangerous, still a set of choices that had compounded for 50 years into something that didn't untangle easily. There would be more of this. More fighting and more maneuvering and more conversations in difficult places with difficult people. But the throne was restored. The sovereignty was recognized. Sirius was free. The legislation that had been built on the vacancy was being reviewed, piece by piece. The structure of the thing was right, and a structure being right was the condition for everything else. He looked at Fawkes. The phoenix looked back at him from the throne's carved back, close enough that Harry could feel the warmth of him on the back of his neck, the bonfire and the throne warmth and the song all the same thing at the foundation. What now? Harry said, quietly, to the bird. Fawkes sang the opening phrase. The first 4 notes of the song. The phrase that Harry had understood since he was 8 years old, lying on his back in the small bedroom at Privet Drive staring at the ceiling with a phoenix on his headboard. Yes. I know. I believe you. Now we begin. 3 weeks later, on a warm evening in the first days of June, Harry sat in the Phoenix chamber at the top of Gryffindor Tower and wrote a letter to Sirius. Not about politics. Not about the Horcruxes or the Wisengamot or the next session's agenda, which was going to be complicated in ways he was already mapping. Just a letter. His father had written to Sirius all the time about nothing in particular, about Quidditch and terrible jokes and arguments about who was better at Transfiguration, and Harry had decided that was something worth inheriting. He wrote about Ron beating him at chess again. About Hermione finishing her third-year exams 2 days early and spending the remaining time reorganizing the library's indexing system because she'd found a flaw in it. About Neville growing a plant in herbology that Professor Sprout had described as extraordinary and that Neville had named after his mother. About the way the castle felt different now. Not changed, not rebuilt, itself. More fully itself. Like a person who had been holding their breath for a century and had finally let it go. Fawkes sat on the windowsill with the evening light behind him, and the sun was going down over the mountains in the particular extravagant way of early June, all gold and rose and the specific depth of blue at the horizon that meant the night was going to be clear. Down on the grounds, students were taking advantage of the last evening of term, scattered across the lawns in the warm light, and their voices came up faintly, ordinary and alive. Harry finished the letter and read it back. It was nothing remarkable. It sounded exactly like his father's letters, the easy warmth of it, the texture of small observations. He sealed it and handed it to Fawkes without a word. Fawkes took it, looked at Harry for a moment, and then sang the renewal phrase, the bright one, the one after the loss and before the next beginning, the one that was both ending and start in the same breath. Then he was gone, out the window and into the summer evening, a streak of gold and red against the deep blue sky, carrying a letter from a son to his godfather, climbing and climbing until he was a point of light indistinguishable from the first stars of the night. Harry watched until he was gone. Then he turned back to the Phoenix chamber and the carved walls and the mosaic floor with its ruby-eyed phoenix, and the window behind him framed a sky that was full of color and enormous and completely, entirely open. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his knees up and breathed, and the castle breathed around him, and outside the window the last light was burning and it was beautiful, it was genuinely and completely beautiful, and he was 13 years old and he had a great deal still to do and he was, in the specific and total way that the best moments are, all right. More than all right.